Here we are again, together, all together again. Welcome, everybody. My name is Noel Joshua Hadley. This is the Unexpected Cosmology. Please, like and subscribe if you haven't before. You guys know the drill. Leave a comment below. Have fun in the chat tonight. I was going to give this presentation a couple nights ago, and what a week it's been. A storm ripped through America. Nobody was talking about it. And then it just came. And of course, I'm in South Carolina, and we didn't get it that bad here. I mean, it was one of the worst storms, one of the, I would say, top 5 in my life that I've ever been in. And people all through America right now, Pennsylvania, North Carolina, places like that, they got it really bad. Tennessee, so my heart goes out to them. My thoughts, my prayers. And the internet was down here a couple nights ago, and I was like, I'm not going to fight it. It's going to let it be. So here we are now. Before we get into this tonight, Mary Magdalene and the Holy Grail, this is going to be a 2-parter. So I'm going to be talking the first half about the woman in the alabaster jar, and the second half is going to be Mary Magdalene and the Holy Grail. They both go together. So again, a couple of things. If you grew up in evangelical Christianity in the West, there is a high likelihood that you are of the opinion, just because it has been told to you so many times, vocally by oral tradition, that it must be true, that Mary of Bethany and Mary Magdalene are 2 different women. And there's probably good reason as to why that happened, is to mask. I mean, if Mary Magdalene is the one that anointed him with the nard, it just changes the whole picture, doesn't it? And if you have a one-off with this Mary of Bethany lady, it's like, who is she? And she did this, and it kind of is what it is. On the flip, though, that there is, as far as I'm concerned, overwhelming evidence, not just in Catholicism. We could all just chalk it up to Catholicism, but you have Orthodoxy, you have ancient literature, call it Gnostic if you want, but going all the way back, ascribing Mary Magdalene to the woman Mary of Bethany, and being the one that gave the nard, cracked open the nard with the alabaster jar, as well as artwork itself, the whole world of artwork. There's just painting after painting after painting, hundreds and hundreds of years old, all showing that Mary Magdalene at the cross had the alabaster jar. So something to consider. Now, secondly, before I go into this tonight, if this idea that Messiah, Jesus Christ, I prefer calling him Yeshua or Yahusha, Yahusha HaMashiach, by his Hebrew name. Now, if it really bothers you, this idea that he had a betrothed, that he had a wife, let me just say this: you are free to your opinion, totally free to your opinion. And what I want to do, the way I want to go at this tonight is, I mean, everybody knows that there is literature out there, ancient literature, which says that he had a wife. You go in the Gospel of Philip, some of this kind of stuff, right? We know that the ancients did hold this view, whether they were correct or not. What I want to do is go at it. Everybody knows I have stated this time and again throughout my research that when I started the investigation of Mary Magdalene, was she the betrothed of the Messiah, I wanted to completely circumnavigate all the Holy Grail stuff. I didn't read Dan Brown's book. I didn't watch the movie. I knew nothing about that stuff. I just wanted to be completely detached from that and just look at scripture itself. Finally, it came time for me to start digging into this idea of the Holy Grail. I knew I'd get there eventually. And again, without going to all these other books, I decided to go to the original Arthurian mysteries. Read the original source material where they're introducing the Holy Grail. And I was just like, holy cow. I'm reading this stuff going, oh my goodness. It is so clear. In my opinion, it is so clear they're talking about Mary Magdalene and a little bit more than that. And so whether or not you, the viewer, believe that he had betrothed let's just set that aside for the second. And what I want to do is say, did other people in history believe this? And specifically, did the Grail writers, the very people who you could say invented the Grail myth, the very people that are talking about the Grail, did they believe that the Grail is referencing Mary Magdalene? Well, I believe so. So let's get right to it tonight. I have a lot to cover. We're going to start with Mary Magdalene, the woman, and the alabaster jar. Nard is only used on 2 separate instances in the entirety of canon. And by canon, I'm talking about the 66 books. I would include the Apocrypha in there too. And I checked. The first shout out goes to Song of Songs, or Song of Solomon, Song of Shalom, if you prefer, which you can read about in my report, Mary of Magdal and the Song of Shalom connection. And I highly suggest you do, because the second instance can be found in 2 of the 4 Gospels, Mark and John. And like Song of Songs, the scene is a scandalous one. Well, that's suspect. It's almost like they want you to cross-reference or something, but that's probably none of my business. The incident also occurs in Matthew without ever mentioning the nard. Same event, though. So I guess you could say there's 3 references. John, however, is probably the most important. Now, if you're reading along, you can see I put the Hebrew names here. Yochanan. Yochanan is the Hebrew name of John. And, I might go back and forth between their names tonight. It's why I thought to pull the highlighter out on this one. You shall see why in a little while. Well, here is how Yochanan, or John, puts it. And he writes, and when the Pharisees, or the Parashim, desired him that he would eat with them, I should say one of the Parashim, and he went unto the Pharisee's house and sat down to eat, or to meat. And behold, a woman in the city, which was a sinner, when she knew that Yahusha sat to eat in the Pharisee's house, brought an alabaster box of ointment, and stood at his feet behind him weeping, and began to wash his feet with tears, and wiped them with the hairs of her head, and kissed his feet, and anointed them with the ointment. Now, when the Pharisee which had bidden him saw it, he spoke with himself, saying, this man, if he were a prophet, would have known who and what manner of woman this is that touches him, for she is a sinner. Oops. I read from Luke rather than Yochanan. How embarrassing of me. We should try this again. The mix-up happens sometimes. What I just quoted from is a completely different story, or is it? The story is told completely out of order from the feet anointing story in other Gospels. And this fact has been long noted. But if we pay heed to certain details, then we shall certainly come to find that they are indeed the same story. Only the distracted or untrained eye will come to any other conclusion. Yahusha is eating a meal at the table when a woman in that city enters the room to anoint his feet with a precious ointment from an alabaster box using her hair. We are repeatedly reminded that she was a sinner. What sins did she commit? We are not told. It is only the Pharisee who calls her out on her transgressions without ever naming them. How convenient. For me, that beckons the question, did this woman transgress the oral law of the Pharisees, which is to say the Talmud, that the oral law became the Talmud, or the written Torah of Moses? Those are 2 completely different laws. And I get Christians coming and telling me all the time that they confuse them. Most Christians, unfortunately, can't tell the difference between the Talmud and the Torah. I talk to so many, and they don't even know what the Talmud is. They think kosher, like the very word kosher, is Torah. It's not. Or I should say in the sense of, like cheeseburgers or something like that, right? Which is kosher. That's not even in the Torah. So the Talmud, disobeying the Talmud is not a sin, whereas transgressing the Torah is a sin. But an aspiring member of the Pharisee would not be able to tell the difference. The house belongs to a certain Parashim, a Pharisee. His name is Simon, the jar maker. No, we haven't read that far yet, but in a line or two, he will be identified. And there is much in the course of this investigation which can be gleaned from him. The context simply isn't given by Dr. Luke, the historian here. The reason why Simon invited Yahusha over is because Eliezer, that would be Lazarus, had only days earlier been raised from the dead. So too was the dead man invited. But why? So Lazarus is at the table too. I thought the Pharisees and Yahusha were at odds with each other. And in fact, the resurrection of Eliezer was the turning point in their relationship, in so much that the Pharisees knew they needed to do something about Yahusha before others started rising from the grave. The dead man was a celebrity and a major driving force as to why the crucifixion of Yahusha was pushed forward. And so Simon the jar maker sounds terribly out of place while the formerly dead man, Eliezer, was seated at his table, eating with Yahusha. Also, the woman was his sister, but we haven't gotten that far into the facts quite yet, meaning the woman that cracked open the alabaster jar. Getting back to Luke's account of things is what he says. And Yahusha answering said unto them, Simon, I have something to say unto you. And he said, Rabbi, say on. Pause. You see, there he is, Simon the Pharisee. So continuing. There was a certain creditor which had two debtors. The one owed 500 pence and the other 50. And when they had nothing to pay, he frankly forgave them both. Tell me, therefore, which of them will love him most? And Simon answered and said, I suppose that he to whom he forgave the most. And he said unto him, you have rightly judged. And he turned to the woman and said to Simon, see this woman? I entered your house. You gave me no water for my feet, but she washed my feet with tears and wiped them with the hairs of her head. You gave me no kiss, but this woman, since the time I came in, has not ceased to kiss my feet. My head with oil you did not anoint, but this woman has anointed my feet with ointment. Wherefore I say unto you, her sins, which are many, are forgiven, for she loved much. But to whom little is forgiven, the same loves little. And he said unto her, your sins are forgiven. And they that sat to eat with him began to say within themselves, who is this that forgives sins also? And he said to the woman, your faith has saved you, go in peace. Now, as a quick commentary here, I'm not going to go down this path, but the reason why it's the reason why it was such a big deal that he was forgiving sins is because, you know what, I'm not going to go down that path tonight because that's going to distract from all the things I want to talk about. Nevertheless, it was controversial that he was able to forgive sins, and I was going to take you down a Torah path, but I won't do that. I had asked the question regarding transgressing the law. Which law? Heaven or man, right? Which law? Are we talking Talmud or Torah? Because the woman is Miriam. You shall see for yourself in a little while. Yahusha and Miriam are already recorded in the other Gospels as having an important encounter together before this little episode. You would never get the sense from Luke's account. But Miriam comes across as perfectly respectable. Regardless, Yahusha doesn't deny she is a woman who has sinned aplenty, telling us the Torah of Moshe has been transgressed rather than the Talmud. Did you follow that? So Yahusha is admitting, yes, she has transgressed, meaning she has transgressed the Torah. He's not concerned about the Talmud. He even turns to her and says, your sins are forgiven. So her reputation was true then. She was a sinner. Why didn't he forgive her days or weeks or even months earlier? He did. The argument Yahusha is giving is a circular one. The proof is in the pudding. The woman was showing a great display of love because her great many sins had already been forgiven and not the other way around. Whatever these transgressions were, and we are not here told, they had already happened in an earlier moment in the narrative. Reputations are a fingerprints and a gripe, and Simon the Pharisee simply had a negligible time in forgetting. Well, here's a hint, though. Simon was siding with his Pharisee contemporaries, her rapist. You can skip ahead to Mary of Magdalene and the adulteress if you don't believe me. I have a whole section on that. And that also goes into Songs of Songs as well and mirrors it with Solomon's beloved being sexually abused by his soldiers or the people within his gates. Why was the woman weeping? According to Luke, one might defer the context to one of sorrow and repentance, but again, Yahusha has already stated that her response was one of love due to her already being forgiven. When telling her your sins are forgiven, he may in fact have been lifting her up for his audience. Because look at the response. The Pharisees were not willing that Yahusha should forgive her. Aside from the fact that they were against Yahusha forgiving anyone because outside of the office of high priest, forgiving for intentional sin was blasphemy, you see, and that's the comment I want to talk about earlier. There's intentional and unintentional sin, but that's a whole different Bible study right there. But the idea is that if you, in the Torah, if you intentionally sin, there's no sacrifice for that I can find. There's the Day of Atonement, which is the holiest day of the year. We just celebrated that in our household last week. But outside of the Day of Atonement and the high priest sprinkling the blood on the mercy seat, which is what Yahushua HaMashiach, our high priest, did, there's no forgiveness for intentional sins. And she committed an intentional sin. You can only bring a sacrifice if it's an unintentional sin. So this is why in their minds, you're like, what right do you have to forgive? This is blasphemy. You cannot forgive for these intentional sins. For this reason, and probably others, they did not feel she was worthy to wash his feet with that ointment from the alabaster jar using her hair. Yahushua's message to Simon is even more perplexing. Simon did not wash his feet with his hair and tears as the woman had. What sort of dude would do that? Serious question. That's an extremely sensual action, don't you think? Truth in plain sight, though we are asked repeatedly by the church to deny it. Don't tell me this was the Middle East and that they didn't sexualize everything like we do today. Quite contrarily, have you ever been to the Middle East? I have on multiple occasions, and I'm not talking about the LGBTQ plus beaches of Tel Aviv either. How about anywhere in the world before the 20th century? Let's start there. A woman's unbound hair was reserved only for her husband. Yes, that is precisely what everyone in the room was thinking. Oh, I'm sure Yahushua was just way ahead of the game in women's lib. You know, he's totally like 2024. You know, was it so 2008? He's so, whatever. Oh no, he's so 2008. You're so 2008. I think that's how it goes. Of course, that's been Mandela affected so many times I can't even keep up with it. Anyways, the ancients' ongoing fight against, toxic masculinity and all that's, I guess, Messiah right here. Nearly 2,000 years, in fact, and ahead of the game. And only Miriam and Yahushua, they're the only two that got it. Whereas the Pharisees and his Talmudim did not. The boys down at seminary sure get it, though. That must be it. Ironically, the hair mopping event has long implied that her former sins were of a sensual nature, even though her current actions are deemed totally innocent. Does that make sense to you? I'm having a difficult time keeping ahead of the Joneses on this one. Also, I'm getting ahead of myself, but Yahushua's criticism makes a whole lot more sense when we come to realize that Simon the Pharisee was Messiah's father-in-law. The issue, as I see it, wasn't the statement being made between a rabbi and his betrothed. No, the issue concerned the woman in question. She was a sinner, an outcast from society. Who is this weeping woman's identity? Well, Luke gives us a clue. It happens a couple of chapters later when Yahushua enters the home of Martha and her sister Miriam. Now it came to pass as they went that he entered into a certain village, and a certain woman named Martha received him into her house. And she had a sister called Miriam, which also sat at Yahushua's feet and heard his word. But Martha was cumbered about much serving and came to him and said, Adonai, do you not care that my sister has left me to serve alone? Bid her therefore that she help me. And Yahushua answered and said unto her, Martha, Martha, you are careful and troubled about many things, but one thing is needful, and Miriam has chosen that good part, which shall not be taken away from her. That comes from Luke 10, 38 through 41. And there it is, the disputed passage among many housewives to date. Why did Martha get stuck with the apron and the dirty dishes? We shan't name them, but every Martha has a sister like Miriam, and you know who I'm talking about, ladies. Always getting out of the housework, always stealing the eye of the handsome lad, taking a while around the block on the back of the motorcycle while you're in the back room making things happen. Don't even get me started. Martha's observation delivers the philosophical question of the ages. What would have happened if Martha also had decided to sit down at Yahushua's feet? The fog remains because the context is too taboo to be answered. In Yahushua's words, the part which Miriam has chosen would not be taken away from her, and you know what that means. The irony is that many have tried to take the role away from her, a role which she alone was called to and in return had chosen. Now, I'm going to just quickly say this, and I might comment on this later, but for everyone out there who's saying that this woman who came in and let her hair out and started mopping his body, anointing him with a sensual fragrance in front of everybody. And this was totally innocent. It's like, okay, yeah, let's have you do that. Try this with your pastor today, in front of the whole church. He's married, by the way, or he could be single. We could go either scenario if we like, but it's totally innocent. Let's just get a woman up there, start just undo your hair, pull out these super sensual fragrances, crack it open with the bride price, all this kind of stuff, and start just anointing him with your hair. Let's see how well that goes down. Exactly. It can't be done. So there's something else going on here. There are those who will argue that Martha's sister and the weeping woman are two separate individuals, and they're not. I had taken the time to answer that question in another paper called Miriam of Migdal or Miriam of Bethany. So you can go to my website, and I have a link to my website. You can go to the archives page. You can dig up years and years and years worth of all these papers. You can go, they're in alphabetical order. You can go look at it and read it. Meanwhile, since we're presently gazing at the Bethany girl, if I'm not mistaken, the other woman to sit at the feet of Yahusha was the weeping woman. Not a coincidence. The woman is Miriam, the sister of Eliezer. Search your feelings. You know it to be true. You still don't believe me, though, do you? You're not going to read the article I toiled over, are you? So much demur. Well, then stop doubting, Thomas, because Yochanan or John clears up any and all confusion when identifying her. And here's what he says in chapter 11 of the Gospel of John. Now, a certain man was sick named Eliezer of Bethany, the town of Miriam and her sister Martha. It was that Miriam which anointed Adonai with ointment and wiped his feet with her hair, whose brother Eliezer was sick. Mic drop. Boom. There's only one woman who anointed Yahusha with nard, wiping his feet with her hair. Stop saying there were two of them. Yochanan offers us far more than most would bargain for when giving up her name. And yet it is only Luke, it's his account which tells us Miriam washed his feet with her tears. Why was she crying? You probably already have that answer. It's because she knew something which nobody else did. And why is that? Before I answer, do recall who Yahusha cried for. Here's a hint. It's the shortest verse in biblical canon. Jesus wept, or Yahusha wept. I said Jesus wept because I don't know, maybe Yahusha adding the couple extra vowels and consonants there, maybe elongated the verse so that there's a shorter one. I don't really know, but whatever. Jesus wept, Yahusha wept, Gospel of John, 11:35. Even sourcing the book, chapter and verse was longer than the actual passage in question. Who was he weeping for, though? You will have to read chapter 11 for yourself so that you can do your fact checking while following along with the currents of events. By the way, the account of Yahusha raising Eliezer from the dead occurs only in the Gospel of John, which is interesting. Now, the reason being is that the Gospel of John is a very different gospel than the three synoptic gospels. And he tells you why at the end. He gets his source from this disciple whom Yahusha loved, who it's not himself. People say it's John, somebody else. And he's saying that the disciple whom he loved, that this disciple's testimony is true. And this is why you get such a personal glance at this family, Lazarus, his two sisters, Martha and Mary, and their father. It's from their perspective. Of course, many people will say that Lazarus or Eliezer is the disciple whom he loved. Might I point out that the people say that she's not the disciple whom he loved does not appear until after Eliezer is resurrected. Actually, that's not true. The disciple whom he loved does not appear until after Mary anoints his feet. More specifically. And from that moment on, there is a disciple whom he loved. From that moment when she anointed his feet. Anyways, when Yahusha arrived at Bethany, he came to find that Eliezer was already lying in the grave for the matter of 4 days. By that time, many Yahudim had arrived to comfort his two sisters. It was Martha who went to meet Yahusha as soon as word hit the street that Adonai had arrived. Miriam, however, stayed behind. Ever stopped to ponder why? Yahusha speaks to Martha about how he is the resurrection and the life, and then calls for Miriam. Martha then relays this message to Miriam secretly, telling her, the rabbi has come and calls for you. As soon as she hears his request, Miriam rises and then goes out to meet him. We then read the following. Then Miriam was come where Yahushua was and saw him, and she fell down at his feet, saying unto him, Adonai, if you had been here, my brother had not died. And when Yahushua therefore saw her, or I add here Miriam, so you know who her is, weeping, and the Yahudim also weeping, which came with her, he groaned in his ruach and was troubled and said, where have ye laid him? They said unto him, Adonai, come and see. And then you get it right there, verse 35, Yahushua wept. It was in seeing Miriam weep. Sure, there were other Yahudim already weeping, but up to that point, Yahushua remained stoic. It was the sight of Miriam which brought him to tears, not the tomb of Eliezer, though I'm sure it was a complete package. The only other instance when we read of Yahushua crying is while entering Yerushalayim in Luke 19:41, days later. The reason is given to us. Israel, or Yasharel, had already been handed a bill of divorce, but now he was lamenting the divorce of Judah, of Yehuda, to come via the coming destruction of Yerushalayim in 70 AD. We again read that he wept tears when offering up prayers and petitions to the one who could save him from death, according to Hebrews 5:7-9. Assumedly, this is the occasion when he sweated blood. His tears are always over the issue of death as well as marriage, it seems. So again, I will inquire, why was Miriam crying when anointing him at the table? No other account mentions her tears, so it is worth asking. Hold that thought, though. I will bring it around full circle before we are through with this present exercise. Finally arriving at Yochanan's recounting of the nard incident, and here's what we read. Then Yahushua, 6 days before the Passover, came to Bethany where Eliezer was, which had been dead, whom he raised from the dead. There they made him a supper, and Martha served, but Eliezer was one of them that sat at the table with him. So here we get a more clearer, concise picture. Then took Miriam a pound of ointment of spikenard, very costly, and anointed the feet of Yahushua, and wiped his feet with her hair, and the house was filled with the odor of the ointment. Then saith one of the Talmudim, Judas Iscariot, or Yehuda Iscariot, Simon's son, which should betray him, why was not this ointment sold for 300 pence and given to the poor? You have to wonder if, I'm just kind of curious if this is the same Simon who is, I don't know. I don't know if they have a second brother. Just a thought. Why was this ointment? Why was not this ointment sold for 300 pence and given to the poor? This he said, not that he cared for the poor, but because he was a thief and had the bag and bear what was put therein. That comes from the Gospel of John 12:1-6. The scene plays out precisely the same way as Song of Songs, Shaloma, nearly. Again, you're going to have to kind of read my paper or look at my past presentation on that. This is what happens. A woman approaches Mashiach while he reclines at the table, surrounded by his entourage. They're all there. She then opens up a bottle of nard and anoints him with it, inciting a pleasant fragrance throughout the house. I will once again remind you of how sensual an act it would be for a woman to unpin her hair and let it hang freely, not to mention sopping it on a man's body. Everyone keeps claiming this is a sexually innocent encounter, that only a perverse mind would see it otherwise. Oh, please. Remind me again why I have never seen any such act attempted on the church pastor. I told you I'd get to this later. Sure, let's see a woman go through with it in front of the congregation. Let's just see you do it. Or at the dining room table surrounded by the elder board. What if the pastor is married? How about if he is single and his thoughts are prone to wander with the anatomy of his skin? Or how about if somebody else's wife did it? Oops, there it is. It is sensual. Only those wishful thinkers who avoid the elephant in the room could deny it. You will tell me that Yahushua is the son of Allah Hayam, or the son of God, but was he man or wasn't he? It's starting to hit the fan, isn't it? Can't have it both ways. Did not Hasatan dare to tempt him? And if women are allowed to clean his body with their hair, then why are they immune? Now, I want to point out here, if you don't know what I'm talking about Song of Songs, it's the same scene. Solomon has his beloved walk into the room. He's there dining. He's got his whole entourage right there. And it's the fulfillment of the betrothal. She comes in, cracks open the bottle, the nard. That's the second reference in all of canon. And she says, tonight, she announces to everyone, tonight, you are going to be laying between my breast. Okay, that's the other reference. So you get a cross reference right there. This is what they're declaring. Now, keep in mind, this is his last week on the earth. He's coming into Jerusalem to be declared king. He's got his queen. It's go time. He's coming in with his kingdom, assumedly. Of course, we know, according to Daniel, it gets cut off. We are not told how Shlomo's retinue responded, nor are we informed of everyone's reaction with Yahusha and Miriam. Here, at least, in this account, it is only Judas Iscariot who has a problem with the unfolding scene. The why is obvious. He is only interested in the money, her money, obviously. And she was actually, we read in Luke that he had two supporters of his ministry, and Mary Magdalene was one of them. She came into a lot of money, probably through her father, Simon the leper, or Simon the jar maker, and was distributing it to his ministry. Obviously, Judas Iscariot has no interest in Yahusha's kingdom. None at all. His only enthusiasm is his own. Believe it or not, I have found a fascinating connection between Judas Iscariot and the financial dealings of Miriam. She was his financier. One thing at a time, though. We shall have to save that for another incident. I do talk about, I believe, in my book, Mary Magdalene, and this is a report from there. If a profound announcement has just been made that the heir to David's throne has declared his queen, then the mind of Judas Iscariot can apparently only maneuver to one place. His own personal inheritance is shrinking, financially speaking. And it is interesting that it is this scene where Judas Iscariot shows his true colors. I mean, he won't betray him for another few days, but it's just interesting that it's this scene where it happens. And here's how the scene plays out in Mark. And being in Bethany in the house of Simon the jar maker. So there you see, instead of Simon the leper, he's Simon the jar maker. And again, he's a jar maker, right? And what does she do? She cracks open an alabaster jar. As he sat to eat, there came a woman having an alabaster box of ointment of spikenard, very precious. And she broke the box and poured it on his head. And there were some that had indignation within themselves and said, why was this waste of the ointment made? For it might have been sold for more than 300 pence and have been given to the poor, and they murmured against her. Now, in this version of the story, the woman is never identified as the sister of Eliezer. We know it is the same occasion because the Pascha, or the Passover, is nearly upon them, and Yahusha is in Bethany. There is Simon again, connecting us back to the woman in Luke. Rather than anointing the feet of Yahusha with her hair, as we saw in Yochanan, the woman cracks open the nard and anoints his head, no hair. So which is it then? His head or his feet, hair or no hair? She anointed both. You figure it might have been slightly more awkward to dry his head with her hair. Perhaps she started with his head and then finished up with his feet. I don't know. I wasn't there. This is one of the things I do love about the Bible is that, particularly in the Gospels, when you have these four different accounts, and they don't line up perfectly. And that's because if you get 12, 15, 20 people in the same room, and you tell them, especially 20, 30 years later, to all write a story about this week in your life and go back. I mean, imagine right now, happened 23, 24 years ago. If I were to tell you all to go and write a story about 9/11, what happened that week, and you're trying to think back like, oh gosh, it was a very traumatic week, but you're trying to think back on it all. And even if you get the details correct, you're going to have these different witnesses in the same room, and they're going to be looking at it from different perspectives. They're going to see different things. One of them doesn't really put the emphasis on who it is that's protesting, either Simon, the father, or Judas Iscariot. They'll be like, oh, just some people in the crowd were, protesting, right? Like there's just different emphasis on everything. The other difference with Yochanan is that Mark identifies more than one person who did not respond in kind. But this time, not even Yehuda or Judas Iscariot is identified, as I just mentioned. Therefore, if you're going to tell me that the potential betrothed is being downplayed by the writer, then so is Yahusha's very betrayer. Just as assuredly as Yahusha's short parable is not given to Simon, not even Yochanan cared to mention who the other murmurers were. For Yochanan, only Judas Iscariot was on his mind. That recollection will become even more enlightening when we stop to appreciate that Miriam of Migdal was Yahusha's financier, and that she also provided the witness testimony for John's or Yochanan's Bezorah, his gospel. Now, that's my theory, and I am very willing to be wrong on that. But when you look at the whole Gospel of John, the whole, like the arch narrative, it's all about marriage, the betrothal, adultery, forgiveness, coming through to the end. It's very unlike the other Gospels. The third, or I guess you could say fourth and final witness, is Matthew, wherein he states the following. Now, when Yahushua was in Bethany in the house of Simon the jar maker, there came unto him a woman having an alabaster box of very precious ointment, and poured it on his head as he sat to eat. But when his Talmudim, this would be his disciples, saw it, they had indignation, saying, to what purpose is this waste? For this ointment might have been sold for much and given to the poor. That comes from Matthew 26. Again, we are told of Simon, the Pharisee, and jar maker's house in Bethany. Everyone seems intent on identifying the host of this episode. Here, the nard is nowhere mentioned, nor is the woman identified. She simply anoints the head of Yahushua with a precious ointment rather than drying his feet with her hair. Also, the Talmudim, plural, are troubled by this action, implying a great deal many beyond his betrayer. Still the same story, though. You will tell me I am taking all of this out of context when, in fact, Yahushua explains precisely what is happening in the following verses, which I have suspiciously left out of the narrative, and you have also dutifully noted that fact. No, I am simply cross-referencing Miriam and the nard and the Song of Songs incident. The Bible is like poetry in that it rhymes. Since when has cross-referencing one parallel event with another even been a crime? In Sunday school, maybe, but this is not your father's Bible study. Man, I really wish maybe I should have started tonight. It was only a few pages. Maybe I should have started tonight with the Song of Songs incident, just so that nobody out there is lost. I recommend everybody give it a read, though. Cross-referencing sure hasn't let me down yet in my career as a researcher and writer. I was saving Yahushua's response until now for a reason. This is what he told his disciples in John. Then Yahushua said, let her alone. Against the day of me burying has she kept this. For the poor always ye have with you, but me ye have not always. That's the Gospel of John chapter 12. Eliezer was risen from the dead. I would imagine a resurrection event such as what had just occurred would cause anyone to relish joyfully at his return from the grave, especially his sister. Eliezer had become a witness to Yahushua's dealings in the kingdom to come, and now we know why Miriam was crying. Yahushua had earlier cried over Miriam having lost her brother, and Miriam in turn was mourning for the loss of Messiah, of Yahushua, and in front of his disciples, Eliezer and the rest. Here is how Matthew assessed the situation. He said, when Yahushua understood it, he said unto them, why trouble ye the woman? For she has wrought a good work upon me. For ye have the poor always with you, but me ye have not always. For in that she has poured this ointment on my body, she did it for my burial. Amen, I say unto you, wheresoever this gospel shall be preached in the whole world, there shall also that this woman has done, be told for a memorial of her. Miriam performed her deed for his burial. You can go ahead and check that box now. You will argue and tell me her deed cancels out any claim that a betrothal was being enacted based upon his explanation. No, it doesn't. Cross-referencing aside, what you need to be asking yourself is how Miriam was so certain that he was going to die in the first place, and in the next few days, as to incite such a performance as this. Nobody else got it but Miriam, apparently. Imagine how many ways that could have gone wrong. She smothered Mashiach with nard in front of his disciples, in front of her brother Eliezer, probably in front of Martha, unless she was doing the dishes in the back, and at least one member of the Pharisees, the last of whom belonged to a group which were actively seeking his murder. And of course, one of them was her father. The only cross-reference any of them had at this point was Song of Songs. Shaloma's lover opened up the nard in order that the king might recline in her breast later that evening, whereas Miriam was pronouncing her widowhood. Her betrothed was about to be taken from her. Notice what follows. Yahushua tells the group, wheresoever his bezorah shall be preached in the whole world, what the woman has done would be told for a memorial for her. It is Miriam as well as her action, which is the memorial. He was lifting her up as his queen in the coming kingdom and in front of everyone. Her boldness would seem to imply that his anointing was either prearranged via private conversations, or that she made the move out of throbbing sorrow, knowing that she was about to lose him. The man who would be crowned king did not excuse her. This wasn't a get behind thee Satan moment. Get behind me, woman. Stop causing me to lust, with your sensuality. That's what everyone else was claiming, right? I will be told Yahusha's proclamation that her action will be a memorial of her wherever the gospel is preached is a false prophecy, if indeed the world doesn't recognize her as his betrothed. No, it simply means they either fail to see it or refuse to. Her action has been recorded in all 4 canonical gospels. Yahusha used that opportunity to memorialize her for the ages. Whether someone chooses to recognize her actions as a memorial of her is up to them. Now, I slipped up a little earlier. It happens in an investigation such as this one. You will recall that I spent so much time at the dinner party of Simon the jar maker attempting to identify Miriam of Magdalene as the woman with the alabaster jar that I didn't even think to interview the host, Simon. He was her father. How did I possibly miss that one? And here I thought the puzzle was complete, or as complete as it would ever be, but no. And actually it goes, I'm not going to even, I want to get to the Holy Grail tonight. I'm not even going to cover all that went on with Miriam and her family and why she's in this predicament. But it is a story, of course, of Israel and adulterous Judea. And I really believe that now. I really believe that Miriam is the same way Hosea was told to go take a woman that was running off. Miriam was far less than what Hosea had to put up with. Let's just put it that way. And here I thought the puzzle was complete, or as complete as it ever would be, but no, the Miriam story arch takes on an entirely new perspective when that little nugget of information is known. Do recall how the dinner party takes place immediately following Eliezer's vacancy from the tomb. Now, the reason you're going to see soon why I'm going through all of this in the alabaster jar, because if you don't understand this important element that Mary Magdalene is the sister of Lazarus and Martha and their father, the 3 of them, their father is Simon the jar maker. If you don't understand that, you're going to be lost through the Holy Grail. And this is why a lot of people will read the Holy Grail stuff and, they're going to miss out on some stuff. Anyways, do recall how the dinner party takes place immediately following Eliezer's vacancy from the tomb. I had speculated earlier that Simon invited Eliezer over because he wanted to see what a resurrected person looked like in person. Perhaps ask him a few questions about the afterlife, whether the Hellenists were right about the eternal spirit, and was the parable of Lazarus and the rich man an accurate depiction of Abraham's bosom? Who really knows? It didn't even cross my mind that the party was thrown as a gift of gratitude to a man who brought his son back to life. It makes sense. Otherwise, Simon was a Pharisee and would have been at total odds with Yahusha. I mean, he was probably at odds with the other Pharisees after this too. In review, Luke mentions a Pharisee. Matthew and Mark identify him as Simon, whereas Yochanan or John is the one who mentions Eliezer by name. All 4 Bezorah accounts assume one lodging at Bethany. Simon and Eliezer lived in the same household. And guess who wasn't invited to the party? The woman with the alabaster jar. Revisiting the Luke account, this is what we read. Now, when the Pharisee which had bidden him saw it, he spoke with himself, saying, this man, if he were a prophet, would have known who and what manner of woman this is that touches him, for she is a sinner. Miriam of Magdalene was not welcome at the party because Simon the Pharisee had deemed it so. An outcast from her own family, she was probably lingering around outside with the dogs. Remember when Yahusha arrived at Eliezer's wailing procession? Ask yourself why Martha was among the mourners, whereas her sister wasn't. She wasn't there at the tomb. And she still stayed behind when she knew he was there. No, Miriam was off on her own and already dead to some of them, specifically her father. She didn't have a head covering either. It's why Simon the Pharisee was off mumbling to himself, somewhat hysterical, that Yahusha would put two and two together if he were truly a prophet. Well, I'm not a prophet and rather slow at these things. Now, again, what a lot more to go through, which I'm not going to go through tonight, is the connection with Ruth and Boaz and the kinsman redeemer at his feet. There's actually quite a few other things I won't be going over tonight. A lot of connections here, a lot of cross-referencing. And clearly this woman is asking him to be her kinsman and redeemer. I have already covered the sexual connotations of the hair washing episode, but then there is another facet to the story worth highlighting. Miriam's lack of head covering was a telltale sign that she had no husband or protector, except for Yahusha, that is. Immediately, I will be told that Yahusha would be breaking Torah in taking Miriam to wife if her father was against the idea, but I disagree. He had already turned his daughter out. In doing so, he had forsaken any authority on what vows she might make before Yahweh. Torah does have something to say about that, and I'm about to show you. This comes from chapter 30 of, is this Numbers? Numbers. Chapter 30 of Numbers. For just sake of time, let me just read to you the highlighted part. If a woman vows a vow unto Yahweh and bind herself by a bond, being in her father's house in her youth, and her father hears her vow and her bond wherewith she has bound her soul, and her father shall hold his peace at her, then all her vows shall stand, and every bond wherewith she has bound her soul shall stand. So let's say that she is living in her father's house and she's under her father's protection, and she vows a vow until Messiah to be his wife. And he cries out like, no, I'm not allowing that. Then he would be breaking Torah. If he is still going against that, he would have to honor her father and say, you know what? Your father's not allowing this. You have to honor your father as well. But every vow of a widow and of her that is divorced, wherewith they have bound their souls, shall stand against her. And let's see, there should be another highlighted section in here. These are the statutes which Yahweh commanded Moshe between a man and his woman, between the father and his daughter, being yet in her youth, in her father's house. So there's a lot we can read here in Numbers, but the idea is that if she is no longer in her father's house, if she is divorced, let's see, what are the other two again? If she's divorced and she's a widow, so on and so forth, she can then make her own decisions in life. And so if, again, a father turns her out because of sin and says, you are no longer my daughter, you're no longer under my care, he can no longer then come back and say, well, I disagree with her vows. No, he's removed from the equation at this time. She then has to make vows to take care of herself. She can make vows with Yahweh at that time. The relationship between a woman, her father, and his role in either canceling out or accepting the vows his daughter has made with Yahweh are given in great detail in Numbers chapter 30, or Bimidbar. Assuming she has assuming she has the hots for another boy and her father hears about it and puts his foot down, the Torah offers them no rights in pursuing that relationship any further. That is, if her father says anything. If she makes a vow and he holds his shalom, saying nothing against the arrangement, he is not allowed to take it back at a later hour. She is in her full rights to move forward. It says in her youth. The general idea is that she would remain under the care and protection of her father until it was agreed upon that another man would take her in as a wife. But then notice something else. A father only has a say in his daughter's vows so long as she remains under his roof. If he has turned her out or is no longer financially providing for her, then he has lost all say on the matter of her vows. It furthermore specifies the rights of a widow or a divorced woman. They too can vow without their father's intervention, seeing as how he has already released them at an earlier hour. Again, now we're going to find in other books like the Book of the Nazarene and others that she actually ended up, she did go off with a Roman soldier. We don't know why. She said she chose love. The idea is perhaps that he raped her. It would have been very common back then for a Roman centurion regard to rape a woman he found beautiful. She could have been betrothed at that time to Messiah. And especially if the wedding scene in John is their betrothal, which I highly suspect it is, he went off with her, or she went off with him. He then, according to the book of the Nazarene, had a wife back in Rome or Italy or wherever he went, and he left her. Now she's abandoned. He went back. He left his post, or he was done on his post, and he went back. And now she was turned out. She had nowhere to go, and it says she became a tavern singer in Galilee at that time. So she had to take care of herself. So revisiting, at that point, obviously the betrothal would be off. So revisiting Simon's reaction, once again, we read this. Now, when the Pharisee which had bidden him saw it, he spoke with himself, saying, this man, if he were a prophet, would have known who and what manner of woman this is that touches him, for she is a sinner. Simon grumbled amongst himself in questioning Yahusha's character, because if you stop to think about it, Yahusha accepting her put his moral judgment into question. He did not protest. At least I am under the impression that his protest was limited because the Torah had no longer given him the authority to do so. He was kind of off in the corner, mumbling, right? That's kind of the impression I get here. And Yahusha, he's like, he doesn't have to answer to this. Miriam was pressed to make her own decision now. All right, now let me skip ahead just for lack of time. Let's see. Just start here. Because I'm not going to make it. I have so much to get to. I'm looking at the time going, oh my goodness. So hold on. I just thought of something. Simon was referred to as a jar maker in Mark 14:3. Yes, a jar maker. Are you connecting the pieces now? Miriam offered Yahusha the nard from her alabaster jar. And there is a connection if ever I've heard one. The scripture writers are offering various clues, but I have been slow in taking the bait. For all I know, Simon had given his 2 daughters a jar as an offering to their future husband, and Miriam kept hers despite being turned out. Simon knew exactly what was happening when she brought that thing into the room and cracked it open. Oh, no, you don't. And now for the reason why I wanted to revisit the woman with the alabaster jar. I have stumbled upon another book during the course of my investigation into everything biblical, which not only identifies Miriam of Magdalene as the woman with the alabaster jar, but gives clarifying detail as to why she landed in her predicament. And this comes from the book of the Illuminators. We sell this in our store. Chapter 23, it says this. When Yahusha spent the days in Jerusalem, the nights were spent on the slopes of Mount Olive, and the Talmudim built shelters close to a place where there was an oil press. I want you to pay attention to that. We will revisit that. However, one day at eventide, Yahusha went to the house of Simon the Pure, where some women who were followers of his were living. Though the disciples were given food, little was said to them. For they being strangers, the people in the house were suspicious, and Simon lay on a cushion across from Yahusha. So we find ourselves in the house of Simon again, though he is given the name Simon the Pure rather than Simon the Leper. Isn't that interesting? Telling us that he has been restored to good standing within the religious community. And it's so awesome when there's just all these different books. I mean, this is the book of the Nazarene, book of the Illuminators, completely detached from the other gospels, often written. This comes from, of course, Joseph of Arimathea was responsible for this book. And so it's just so cool to see these connections. The same could be said regarding his once dead son, I suppose. Not his daughter, though. The text informs us that he had daughters, plural, though if we're being technical, it says there were women who were followers of Yahusha and living with them, which is the same thing. One of those daughters was left outside. Have you ever visited Gashril during the lunar month of Nisan? There are some warm days, but overall it is crisp and the nights get cold. So continuing, this is what it says. And after they had eaten, were talking together, a woman came from a house nearby. She was veiled and carried an alabaster jar. Now this woman was Miriam of Magdalene. So there you see right there, boom, there it is. You have a text that is actually agreeing with all the, you want to call it man-made traditions if you want. It agrees with everything, that they are correct. All the artists, everyone, that the woman with the alabaster jar is Mary Magdalene, whose father had been a merchant, but he disowned her. There it is, boom, he disowned her. For she had lived with a centurion serving in the army of Rome. This is why he had no authority over her now. When he returned to his lawful wife, Miriam had kept herself by singing in the taverns of Galilee. Book of the Illuminators 23:3. Do I give more to this? The woman unsealed the jar and poured a sweet scented oil over the head of Yahusha, seeing which some of those present were indignant, saying, "What a waste, when this could have been sold for a lot of money, which would have benefited the poor." And Yahusha said, "Leave her alone. There is little point in being angry with her when all she has done is to honor me. You can help the poor whenever you like, but I will not be here much longer." And turning to Mary Magdalene, or Miriam of Migdal, he said, "Why do you pay me this honor? For the cost to you must have been great." And someone said the price was easily obtained. So this is like somebody is swiping her in the room. We don't know if this is Judas Iscariot. We don't know if this is her father, but it's somebody. He's like, it's basically saying that, they're calling her a loose woman if she was able to get this money. Now, keep in mind, this is the woman who is giving to his ministry and supporting him. Miriam said to Yahusha, "Sire, I am she whom you saw in Peneus. For when women reviled me, I came to you and said, 'Forgive my sins.' When you asked wherein I had sinned, I said, 'By loving while unwed.' Thereupon you said, 'That of itself is no wrongdoing and demonstrates greater love than that of many who say the price of my love is marriage.' You said, 'I gave the greatest form of love any woman can give, for being virgin, I went to my love without the security of marriage, seeking in no way to bind the man.' And Yahusha said, 'With this man you did no wrong, and though your love was unblessed in the eyes of men, providing you loved truly, it was pure and sanctified in the sight of Elohim. The man, however, is not without sin in this manner and will surely be called to a proper accounting. And though since leaving him you have done wrong, he bears his portion of the guilt. You chose freely not to be a woman reserved for marriage, a choice you could rightly make. Only should you now seek marriage, saying, 'Though I love you too, now I have my price,' would you be doing wrong, this being committed against Elohim, love, and your husband." Nazareth, we've got a problem. Miriam claimed she was told by Messiah on an earlier occasion that she had committed no sin in handing her virginity over to a man outside of wedlock. Yahusha then responds that she's right, she had done no wrong. And that cannot be. We have already read the part about her father turning her out. There is no way he consented to his daughter bedding with a Roman centurion outside of wedlock. That right there is a breaking of the Torah. I mean, this is a daughter of Israel here. The only situation where I can see this working is in his demanding the bride price be paid soon as he found out about their sexual relationship. Let's keep reading. Oh no, comes from Exodus 22:16. "And if a man entices a maid that is not betrothed and lie with her, he shall surely endow her to be his woman. If her father utterly refuses to give her unto him, he shall pay money according to the dowry of virgins." Is this what happened? Miriam may have given her heart to a man with the expectation that she become his woman according to Exodus 22:16. We're dealing with a case of lust and hormones and two consenting adults entangled within the world of polygamy rather than prostitution. Her father would have then demanded a bride price. Now he's demanding it from a Roman centurion. And should he still refuse to hand her over to lover boy, he could still demand payment according to the dowry of virgins. Not that a cocky Roman centurion need oblige the Torah. That's not his law. He's a Gentile. He's not in a covenant with Yahuwah. He was under the law of Caesar and whatever other covenant Elohim rather than Moshe. It seems to me that a payment of some sort was offered. I base this upon Yahusha's evaluation. He said no wrong had been committed initially. Yes, there was a transgression, but that had to do with the centurion ditching his woman rather than his taking her in. He would be held accountable for his recklessness. But now what about Miriam? She had already been turned out by two men, her father being the other one. What is a little lonesome girl to do in a man's world? Well, according to Yahusha, she had committed further wrongs in the years between the Roman centurion and him. Sounds like there may have been other men in the equation. Difficult to tell, though. Going into this, I probably should have told you the text has its problems. Everybody I have so far spoken with has agreed that this passage right here from the book of the Nazarene, and this one alone, though none other found in the whole of the book, really seems to contradict what we find in the Torah, or so it appears to on the surface. I'm not so certain of that, though. I may be wrong, and I'm most willing to be. At the very least, a case has been attempted on my part. Clarification, if you will. The Torah doesn't explicitly outlaw sex before marriage, but that doesn't mean it approves of it, nor is Yahusha attributing this sort of behavior to a holy lifestyle. Feel free to pull out the Magnum and drill bullets into my rectification process. It just seems to me that we need to demand the text has been tampered with whenever something comes along that changes our thinking. I actually think that there in the book of Nazarene gives so much clarification to what happened with Mary Magdalene. It just makes sense. It just connects all the pieces. Assuming the objectors are correct and the scribes have had their way with this one, it is indeed not ironic then that Mary of Magdala alone receives this sort of treatment. Something to think about. Again, though, I am holding out that what we are given is legitimate, though wildly misunderstood, and can be further expanded upon in other areas. I intend to do that when dipping into the Gnostic texts. I won't be doing that tonight. So let's continue with the book of the Illuminators, chapter 23, verse 10. It says, Miriam said, Sire, I have been a sinner, but have not sinned this last year, nor shall I again. Should I love once more, I will not now claim the rights of marriage which I once repudiated. It's really interesting. She talks about the last year. We can go into a lot into that about Betula status, or was Messiah's ministry just 1 year? Was she clean through his entire ministry? Only should you now seek marriage, saying, though I love you too, now I have my price. Would you be doing wrong, this being committed against Elohim, love, and your husband? Mashiach isn't saying marriage is no longer permissible for her. Read it carefully. Miriam is hoping to rectify her past situation. Therefore, Yahusha is clarifying that she has forsaken the bride price. To demand one is to commit wrong against her husband. Say that again. Her husband. She is seeking out a husband. Which husband are we talking about? It can't be the Roman centurion or any of the others potential bachelors, because she's never been married before. The husband she speaks of is the one whom she hopes to marry. Remember, she was a virgin. The Roman centurion came in, probably raped her. She chose love. She went off with him. It all derailed. She's never been married. Why are they even having this conversation? Miriam's sister is there. Her brother Eliezer is most certainly accounted for. Her father is probably gasping for breath or clutching his heart on the other side of the table, fighting off the urge to go into cardiac arrest. The ever-busy Martha might even be holding out a paper bag so that he can hyperventilate into it. The ever-helpful Martha. The entire scenario is going down in the very four walls and roof, which she was no longer welcome under. I might as well snap a picture and then frame it for you. Miriam of Magdala has cracked open a bottle of nard. She then anointed Yahusha's feet with her hair in front of his entourage and her family. And now they're having the love and marriage announcement for all to hear. They're talking about it like engagement. Why are you still fighting this? Is it really so difficult to fathom that Yahusha would take a woman? Now, getting back to Miriam's response, verse 10, we read this. Instead of making you flip back through the paper, I'll write it out for you here. Miriam said, Sire, I have been a sinner, but have not sinned this last year, nor shall I again. If I love once more, I will not now claim the rights of marriage, which I once repudiated. And Yahusha said, love is a blending of ruachoth and not a union of flesh. Woe to those who love compounds discord in the place where love is fulfilled. If things confound you, read the books of wisdom. She confesses to having sinned with the Roman centurion and potentially with any number of others, but it hasn't happened at any time during the last year. Year. Are you reading this? That's the length of betrothal between a bride and her groomsmen. She has reserved her heart for Yahusha and has arrived to make that fact known. She's been pure for him. Another thing she has done is to clear her name. The entire adultery episode in the street was perpetrated by the temple crew. So, just to go off this text alone, this is what I'm seeing happen. I think that the Gospel of John notes their betrothal. We then see her cast down in the street. The It's funny. I've had several people on YouTube come and tell me today that Messiah did not teach the Torah because he should have stoned the woman. Well, first of all, that's not true because they didn't follow through with the Torah at all. There was no man standing there, none whatsoever. That should have been the both of them. And so right there, it's imbalanced. You can't go through with it. It's like, no, bring me the guy. Oh, no guy. Well, then I'm going to claim her innocence. But of course, in this case, he actually points that he writes in the sand, right? The dirt. He actually points out all those people that hauled her in. They had done that to her. They had done something very wrong to her. And they were accusing her of what they had committed. And this goes into Song of Songs as well. All right, so let me just skip some of this just for lack of time, or else we'll be here all night. Thank you, everybody. I'm almost done with this section. Then we're going to get into the Holy Grail. So this is odd. I can't find the intel which I'm prepared to give you anywhere else on the internet. I checked, but it's simply not there. That or it's submerged in the whereabouts of the neighborhood that my own paper is about to be buried in. What I found can be attributed to another one of my reconnaissance missions. You're welcome. Oftentimes, these discoveries happen on the internet, but like I said, I couldn't find it there. This one happened by total accident while turning the pages of dusty old books in mostly forgotten shelves. It involves Simon the leper, and because it involves Simon the leper, it also implicates Miriam of Magdalene, since I have already established that she was his daughter. Excited yet? You should be. Tack on the Garden of Gethsemane, and we have another piece of the puzzle. Now, this comes from Joseph of Arimathea, and this is what I told you. So we're going into Holy Grail territory now from here on out. And Joseph of Arimathea was one of the first books ever written on the Holy Grail back during the quote-unquote Dark Ages. And this is what it says. Then all those whom Judas had informed gathered at the house of Simon the leper. And when the disciples realized this, they were filled with fear. And once the house was full and Judas was sure that they had upper hand, he stepped forward and kissed Jesus. All right. So what happens here is that they have the Last Supper. They cross over the brook Kidron. They go up to Mount of Olives, Garden of Gethsemane, and they go into Bethany to the house of Simon the leper. And when he's actually betrayed, it actually happens at the house of Simon the leper. So the Garden of Gethsemane is there wedged into the empty spaces for those of you who appreciate the skill set needed in reading between the lines as I do. In the canonical Gospels, we are told that Yahushua was betrayed in the Garden of Gethsemane, whereas here, it happens in the house of Simon the leper. Seriously, are we to believe the writer of Joseph of Arimathea never read the Bible for himself? I mean, supposing he didn't own a copy of the good book himself, you'd think he could check one out from the library, get his sources, get his facts straight on this, assuming a library card wasn't too expensive to acquire, and at the very least, ask a local parish priest for research purposes. Like, where was he betrayed? That's good to get your facts right, right? Contrarily, none of this is an accident. The writer of Joseph of Arimathea is embedding clues regarding the Holy Grail, and he's seeing if we're paying attention. He's saying the Garden of Gethsemane and the house of Simon the leper are the same thing. I will ask you to stop and think about the implications. Now, before you do, recall what we've already read in the book of the Illuminators. Quick review. And it says, and I told you to take a mental note of this. When Yahushua spent the days in Jerusalem, the nights were spent on the slopes of Mount Olive, and the Talmudim built shelters close to a place where there was an oil press. However, one day at eventide, Yahushua went to the house of Simon the Pure, where some women who were followers of his were living. Yahushua and his disciples had built shelters on the slopes of the Mount of Olives, specifically near to a place where there was an oil press. That's all Gethsemane means. It's a Hebrew word meaning oil press, all right? So they were camping in the Garden of Gethsemane. The shelters being spoken of line up with the night of his betrayal. Remember how none of the disciples were capable of staying awake? Their actions were recorded in Matthew 26 and Mark 14, and look at how close it was to Simon the Pure's house, a hop and a skip. Before spelling this out in black and white terms, here's another passage of scripture to consider. And this comes from Gospel of John, chapter 18. And when Yahushua had spoken these words, he went forth with his disciples over the brook Kidron, where there was a garden into which he entered and his disciples. And Yehuda, Judas, who betrayed him, knew the place, for Yahushua oftentimes resorted thither with his disciples, with his Talmudim. The story of the Bible begins in a garden and then climaxes in a garden. Hasatan, no, hold on, I need to drink a coffee. Hasatan's attempt to destroy Adam's inheritance was a resounding success in the Adam and Chahwaha, or Adam and Eve, in that they were cast out of paradise, thanks in part to the intervention of the serpent. Yahusha resurrected from the dead in a garden of all places, thereby prompting the mile marker in his story when the set apart could begin entering the garden of paradise again. But here in Yochanan, Yehuda plays the part of the serpent, or maybe he's possessed by him. And allowing Hasatan to possess him, he entered a garden so that he might overthrow his kingdom. Which again, remember, Hasatan actually possesses a serpent in the Eden story. And where we've seen this before. I can think of at least one notable source worth rehearsing. This is the Revelation of Moshe. So I won't go through all this again for lack of time, but this is where the serpent is possessed by Satan to go in and into the garden. Adam and Chahwaha, or Adam and Eve, each tended to their portion of the garden, and I will ultimately ask you to think in the same terms of Yahusha and Miriam. Isn't it interesting that the devil was incapable of entering the garden on his own? That's fascinating. He had already been given the boots in the bum and could not return without the aid of an avatar. The serpent was a him rather than a her, which is how biology works in the serpent seed equation. Why have a serpent, though? I could answer that question, but I'd rather have Hildegard do it for you. And this is what Hildegard says, the medieval mystic in Scivius, Book 1, Vision 2:8. She says, because he understood that the serpent more than any other animal resembled him and was eager to accomplish by its deceitfulness what he could not openly in his own form. So the serpent was a reptile like him, most likely being a seraphim reptilian, though the serpent was also reptilian in nature and a character flaw which Yehuda happened to hold as well. Yehuda means Judas Iscariot. Regarding his handing himself over to Hasatan, we've already seen the turning point. It was when Yahusha and Miriam declared their marriage in the home of Simon the leper / pure. And the Garden of Gethsemane belonged to Miriam of Magdalene, Yahusha's financier. And though no longer under daddy's care, it appears as though all was restored on the night when the serpent entered. Now, what I'm going to talk about here is a lot of people are insinuating that this tomb right here, I've been to this tomb. It's phenomenal. It's a rich man's tomb. Many people are insinuating that this really is Joseph of Arimathea's tomb where they buried Messiah. That could be. I don't know. I wasn't there. Now, the story has it that Mary, his mother, was buried here. So let's just get into this really quickly. An interesting side note to the discussion is the Church of the Holy, the Church of the Sepulchre, not the Holy Sepulchre, but Church of the Sepulchre of Saint Miriam, though it is also known as the Tomb of the Holy Virgin Miriam. It can be found at the Garden of Gethsemane, and much like the title implies, the Eastern Orthodox Church claims it's the burial place of Miriam, the mother of Messiah. Now, a man named Belar Mingo Bagatti, a Franciscan friar, excavated the site in 1972 and discovered evidence of a cemetery dating to the 1st century. And isn't that fascinating? Apparently, his findings have not been subjected to peer review, and I won't hold my breath, but clearly the church is old. It dates back to the time of the Crusaders, Millennial Kingdom territory, and the architecture is a match with the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. Why is any of this important? The question which nobody seems interested to answer is why Miriam, the mother of Yahusha, would be buried at Gethsemane to begin with. How much money did the family of a carpenter have exactly? I have visited the church in decades past and feel another return trip is needed so that I can inquire all that I desire to know from a resident priest. When taking tabs of the important moments in a mother's life, sweating blood, receiving a kiss from the betrayer, and not to mention Kepha chopping off an ear, doesn't scream burial place for mommy exactly. Perhaps I'm going about this all wrong, and his mother simply chose to cherish the place which her son found solitude in. But then Why Miriam was buried here rather than Joseph of Ramah's garden is a Q&A far exceeding everyone's pay grade, apparently. Now, again, a lot of you out there are going to be like, but Joseph's garden is the Garden of Gethsemane. Actually, I don't agree with that. That my research is not. I know that there has been people who have come to that conclusion. That's not mine. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe they're right. I actually do think that the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, it's a millennial kingdom structure, and I believe that I think that is actually, even though the Catholic Church, actually it's not the Catholic Church, it's the Ethiopian, the Orthodox, they all claim it. They all claim space there. The Armenians as well. They all have like a kind of title to that place, and I think it probably is the actual tomb, which would make it the Garden of Joseph of Arimathea, which means his garden no longer exists. My personal thought on the matter is that, again, Joseph's garden was already used for Sabbath meetings when Miriam died. That tomb would remain empty. So they weren't burying anybody else in there. If she was buried at the Garden of Gethsemane, the most logical deduction to make is that it too belonged to a family. Meaning that, again, he's a poor carpenter's family. How in the world are they affording a tomb like that? Well, I think it's because it's Simon the leper's tomb. All right. I think it's Lazarus's, would have been Lazarus's tomb, interestingly enough. Not the one he was buried in. I think the one in Bethany is legit, but it was his. I think it was Messiah's tomb. I think he inherited it. One final thought before closing for the day, and then we're going to turn to the next piece. There are 8 olive trees growing in the Garden of Gethsemane today, which are dated some 900 years old. A 2012 study found that 3 of those trees originate from 1092, 1166, and 1198, respectively, according to carbon dating. I know, right? Carbon dating. Well, furthermore, DNA tests show that the trees were originally planted from the same parent tree, telling us that they were most likely sprouts reviving from older roots. The same roots which survived the destruction of Jerusalem in 70 AD by the Romans. It is my personal opinion that the inhabitants of the millennial kingdom tended to the garden which Yahusha and Miriam inherited. All right. Let's turn over here to Mary Magdalene and the Holy Grail. Hold on some toilet paper or something. Here we go. Stop beating around the bush and finally get to it, is what everyone's been telling me since day one of this investigation. And this is what everybody wants to know. If Miriam of Magdalene is the betrothed Mashiach, as you suggest, meaning as I suggest, then what of the Holy Grail, and were there children involved? Is all anyone seems concerned about whenever I think to invoke her name, as if there is a loaded gun pressed to my head by the inquisitors and my answer depends upon it. You could see I was really looking forward to writing this paper. Well, as I've been stating from the get-go, I had never seen Ron Howard's Da Vinci Code movie, nor read the Dan Brown book, which it was based upon, or any of the other books associated with it. That Dan Brown based his book upon, and have furthermore steered clear of the Holy Bloodline Research Department as a whole, wanting my own scriptural inquiries to be unbiased, if that is even still humanly possible in the world we live in, to be unbiased. This quest of discovery was my own. So for clarity, the Holy Grail topic is one which I've been trying to avoid for years now, a great long while. The far more pressing question, one which I've satisfactorily answered in my own mind, was whether or not Yahushua HaMashiach had a woman. All indications say yes, he did. You know her name, and may I ask, what is the purpose of marriage? To become one in flesh, of course. And what is one flesh an idiom for, but the fruit of sexual intercourse? Children. That's what I believe one flesh is. They shall become one flesh. That your children is your one flesh coming together, right? You are little creators tasked with making these pre-existent spirits that already, were created in the very beginning, but you are now, the spirit is made in Yah's image, but now the flesh is made in your image. That's really neat how that works. Indeed, the topic before us is a meaty one, not intended for the milk drinkers of the world or the faint of heart. I'm assuming if you made it this far, then you're hopefully not the faint of heart. Let's just say I have read a book or two along the way and discovered some things, and in fact told my readership rather recently that I have stumbled upon information which, for the first time in my professional career, I did not feel comfortable putting forward. I think I was saying that, like, I published this last March. So we're in, this is October 3rd as of this publication. So I published this like 6 months ago. And even like 6 or 7 months before that, I'm like, I don't want to write this, but eventually I did. And then it took me like another half a year to actually present it tonight. What I have to say really should be restricted for the few on a need to know basis. FYI, I'm still somewhat oblivious as to what the Holy Grail crowd is stating. Okay, just so you know. And I think that is a good thing, because it means my research and my conclusions are my own. And it is this. The Holy Grail is the bloodline of Messiah. Ironically, my discovery came while studying for the final exam of the 7,000-year timeline deception, which you would think has nothing to do with Miriam of Migdal, but this is, after all, the kingdom verse. One thing leads to another, and every piece of the puzzle connects to the greater whole. Supposing you dipped your toes into my timeline thesis, then you will recall that 536 was the year of the fire reset, with 537 being the fall of Camelot. That's actually a meaty paper in and of itself, because it happens to include my spin-off research on the rod of Yahuwah and Excalibur. The short of it is that the rod which Yahuwah created the world with passed to Moshe, continuing all the way down the line to Yahushua HaMashiach. And medieval artwork will testify that he entered Sheol and rescued his captives and then resurrected from the dead, all while clutching the rod. That same rod was then carried by Joseph of Ramah to Britain, where it awaited the return of the king. Anyways, that's the short of it. My interest in the Grail materialized through Joseph of Ramah, aka Joseph of Arimathea. What happened is I decided to revisit my college days by tapping into the Arthurian mysteries or Arthurian literature, seeking clues, and here we are. The Grail legend apparently finds its creative cornerstone with the poetic French romance Percival, the story of the Grail. And I say apparently because we're going with the official narrative, and you know it's suspect. Well, it was written by the mysterious, his name is Christian de Troyes in the 12th century, or so they say. And though all Grail legends are said to descend from his well of inspiration, his work was strangely left unfinished. So isn't that interesting? He never published it. He didn't even finish it. It was unfinished, unpublished. And yet from this mystery source, they tell us that all the Grail legends come from. I guess that's hope for some of you writers out there who will never get your dream project out. And who knows? Who knows what will come of that? Perhaps I will have more to say on him later, because it was Robert de Baron who supposedly picked up the pieces of Troy's manuscript, penning the first Arthurian trilogy, Joseph de Arimathea, which I quoted from a few minutes ago, Merlin, and Percival. And I actually quoted a lot from Merlin when talking about Camelot in 537. FYI, I read all three while sitting on Florida sands last winter, which I'm getting ready to return there in a couple weeks, and just about fell off my beach blanket when reading the following. This is what it said. Then Jesus spoke other words to Joseph, which I dare not tell you, nor could I, even if I wanted to, if I did not have the high book in which they are written, and that is the creed of the great mystery of the Grail. And I beg all those who hear this tale to ask me no more about it at this point, in God's name, for I should have to lie. And from lies, you may be sure they would gain nothing. And that comes from Joseph of Arimathea. Astonishingly, that is how the Grail legend begins, with a mysterious writer who claims he is in the know regarding the Grail, but cannot tell you what it is, and would in fact have to lie to you by creed if pressed to pucker up and tell. I mean, why not just, like, if it's just a cup, like, what it's like, oh, hey everybody, there was a Grail, a cup. The cup had blood in it, right? And he's like, no, I'm telling you, that's not really what it is. It's a Grail with blood in it, but that's not what it is. But don't ask me, because I'm gonna have to lie to you, because I'm in the know on what it is, but I cannot, unless if you are initiated, you can't know. So unless you are in the boys club, which I am not, and most likely you're not either. Who knows? I mean, I don't know who's listening to this right now. It's his way of saying you'll have to read between the lines on any and probably all details surrounding the Grail, or else confuse the meaning entirely. You see what I'm saying? He's saying, look, I'm going to try to insinuate and hint at what it is, but you're going to have to read it beyond this exoteric, it's just a cup, or else you're not going to get it. And good thing I received my honorary PhD in line reading, or reading between the lines. It's more of an honorary PhD. Allow me to be your tour guide. It's not a cup. The Holy Grail happens to be the disciple who reclined against Mashiach at the Last Supper, the disciple whom he loved. And moving forward, and I have a whole thing on that, where even there are textual scholars out there who look at the Gospel of John, and they actually believe that one passage where the disciple whom he loved and Mary Magdalene are in the same scene, they feel like somebody actually switched a line there, and to cover it up. So moving forward, Robert de Boron's narrative will make a whole lot more sense if we swap out every mention of the cup for Mary Magdalene. For example, then the Jews seized him and led him away, and Pilate stayed and called for water and washed his hands, and said that just as his hands were clean, so was he clean of responsibility for the man's death. Thereupon the Jew who had taken the vessel from Simon's house came to Pilate and gave it to him. Pilate took it and kept it safe. So again, read Mary Magdalene's that, because, by the way, I've already written an entire line-for-line commentary on Bezorah Keefa, the Gospel of Peter, aka the Gospel of Peter, wherein I make a solid case for Pilate's innocence. And the Pharisees murdered Yahusha, not the Romans. I will also quickly direct you to, well, what we just looked at earlier tonight, Mary Magdalene and the Alabaster jar, because in my latest update, I include a section on Robert de Boron's insistent that Simon the jar maker was the owner of the Garden of Gethsemane. Why is that significant? Because Simon the jar maker was the father of Eliezer, Martha, and Miriam. Another odd tidbit is that the Virgin Miriam was buried there too in Simon the leper's plot of land. And so now we see that an unidentified Yehud snatched the Grail, or / cross it out, Mary Magdalene, from her daddy's house at the same moment that Yahusha was taken captive. And it makes total sense. Okay, think about this. Who had a problem with the nard incident? It was Judas Iscariot. And so when they came for Yahusha, they came for his bride too. Telling us that Yahusha's captors were obsessed with tracking down the cup, which he happened to drink from at the Passover meal. And before the Jews kept the Passover, by the way, so they didn't care about this. They're not like, oh, this is the cup of the new covenant. Nobody's thinking that way. And before one of Simon's servants gave it a rinse in the dishwasher, makes no sense whatsoever. Why would they do that? They wouldn't. Gee, I wonder if Pilate was interested in his fork and spoon too, and the plate he ate from. And what about the dinner plate? Obviously, it was the Son of God, the Son of Allah Hayam, which they came for, and also his queen. It's why Pilate was sure to keep Yahusha's woman safe as soon as she was handed over to him. Keep in mind that Pilate was a friend with Joseph of Arimathea. All right. So, and I am of the opinion that Joseph of Arimathea was either Yahusha's great uncle, or I kind of lean towards his grandfather. He was actually the Virgin Mary's father. And he would have taken him in under his wing after his father, Joseph, had died. And he's friends with Pontius Pilate. So Pontius Pilate sees Mary Magdalene, who is the betrothed or the wife of his good friend's grandson. And he's like, okay, this guy's innocent. I'm definitely I see what they're doing to him, to the Son of God. Like, oh my goodness, I'm definitely keeping her safe. I'm not going to let anything happen to her. At that time, when our Lord was upon the earth, most of the land of Judea was answerable to Rome. The Romans held sway over the region where our Lord dwelt, and the governor's name was Pilate. This Pilate had in his service a soldier named Joseph of Arimathea, who followed Jesus Christ to many places and loved him deeply in his heart, but dared not show it for fear of the other Jews. For our Lord had many enemies and adversaries set against him. That too comes from Joseph of Arimathea. Hold on a second here. I need some more coffee, or else I'm not going to make it tonight. Hope you guys are all doing well. I know some of you are going to have to kind of come and go with this as well because of the length, and finish it later. But shouldn't be more than another hour, I don't think. So Joseph of Arimathea is a soldier, according to this text, serving under Pilate, which is the same thing as saying he's not related to Yahushua HaMashiach in Robert de Boron's narrative, and isn't that strange? Fascinating is more like it. Everyone knows that Joseph was related to Yahusha, especially the French and the British. And so they make a big deal about this, the British especially. And so even in their own in these Grail accounts, suddenly he's not. Most claim him to be again a great uncle, though I'm now of the opinion that he's the father of Mary and the Virgin, which would then make him Yahusha's grandfather. Some of you will immediately discredit this book, de Boron, on his oversight, as though he has fumbled with the ball, but how we've already forgotten. He has already told us, he's warned us, that a detail or two would be camouflaged or else risk full disclosure. You can give it some time. In a little while, you will see why de Boron made a necessary swap to Joseph's relations to tell this tale. Had that not been the case, then all would be revealed. So reading on, he says, and he gave the vessel to Joseph, who received it with great joy. Yahushua HaMashiach was presently being tortured by the Yahudim and about to be hung from a cross, and yet Joseph was overjoyed to receive a dinner cup. Oh, gee, thanks, I guess. Wait, let's try this again. Yahushua HaMashiach was presently being tortured by the Yahudim and about to be hung from a cross, which is why Joseph was overjoyed to receive Miriam of Migdol into his care. Joseph then takes the vessel, or cross it out, scratch that. Joseph then takes Miriam to the foot of the cross, protected by a Roman edict. Unlike previous attempts to sexually molest Yahusha's betrothed, nobody could lawfully lay a hand upon her for now. Because remember now, Joseph of Arimathea is also given the body of Mashiach. Like Pilate comes in and goes, oh, by the way, Jews, you can't have his body. My edict, Roman law, I'm giving it to Joseph of Arimathea. Joseph. So now Joseph gets the bride and the groom. He gets both of them, one living, one dead. Of course, if this had been an actual Roman crucifixion, by law, he could not have done that. He would have been breaking the law. His body would have remained the property of the state from that point forward. So he gave him to Joseph in order to, kind of stick it to his murderers. You will again need to refer to my Gospel of Peter Bezorah Keefa commentary, as I have shown the stink the Yahudim made when Pilate handed the body of Yahusha over to the care of Joseph rather than Herod. Had Rome, again, actually crucified Yahusha, then Pilate wouldn't have released his body to anyone, not even his relations, especially his relations. He was a criminal, according to Roman law. But again, Roman law did not crucify him. Herod's boys wanted to do worse things to him. Pilate knew it, and Joseph knew it, which is why the two of them worked together. Remember when I went through the only begotten daughter of Elohim, that very controversial paper, which I now believe is the daughter of Zion, which is talked about. The daughter of Zion is talked about, and I actually think that that's Mary Magdalene. I highly suspect that the daughter of Zion is Mary Magdalene. And I had stated, if they did this to the Son of God, imagine what they would do to his daughter. You see what I'm saying? And this is how sticky the situation was on this night. So in turn, the Yahudim had Joseph thrown into prison as an act of revenge. And that much is documented in the Gospel of Nicodemus. And then we see this again through all the Holy Grail literature. It says the same thing. Robert de Boron has Joseph thrown into prison as well, which makes absolutely no sense if he were a Roman soldier. But I digress. See, this is what I'm saying. The Jews can't just have a Roman soldier like, oh, we're so upset that you got his body by Roman law, by edict of Pontius Pilate, we're going to throw you in jail. No, you can't do that. And this is why you can't take everything they're saying. They're telling you straight up, you can't take all this at face value in the Arthurian Grail legends. It's all there masked for a purpose. So is he really a Roman soldier? No, he's not really a Roman soldier. Clearly. So here's just some, show you the artwork here of Mary Magdalene. And at the foot of the cross. And again, constantly you see a alabaster jar in a lot of these. I probably should have shown more in the artwork of an alabaster jar. Just making the connection. And then he remembered his vessel and thought the drops of blood that were falling would be better in the vessel than elsewhere. So he placed it beneath Christ's wounds and blood from the wounds in his hands and his feet dripped into the vessel. It's talking about the Grail. I have a question for the class. It is in regard to art. Joseph collected the blood which flowed from Mashiach's wounds into Miriam. You see, I scratched out the vessel there because we're supposed to be doing that in this exercise tonight. And who is constantly shown at the foot of the cross, kneeling down in the splash zone, but Mary Magdalene. You're beginning to get the idea. And our Lord took hold of the precious vessel with the most holy blood that Joseph had gathered from his precious body when he washed him. When Joseph saw the vessel and knew it as the one that he had hidden in his house, unknown by any man on earth but he was filled with the love of Christ and certain faith. And he went down on his knees and cried for mercy, saying, Lord, am I worthy to keep such a holy thing as this vessel? And of course, who runs off to Britain with Mary Magdalene but Joseph of Arimathea, right? Now, the present scene right here, this is not at the foot of the cross, so if you're a little confused what just happened, the present scene is in prison. This is when he's thrown in. Joseph is tossed into solitary confinement at the hands of the Yahudim, and somebody swallows the key. He's not coming out of this place. The dungeon is actually described as a tower, a migdal, another clue. There is no chance in Sheol that he's ever getting out until Yahusha visits him. And look what happens. Yahusha takes hold of the precious vessel, of Miriam of Migdal, containing within her his blood. Joseph had already hidden her away in his home, though here he is tasked with becoming her caretaker. And why wouldn't he be? We know that Joseph of Ramah, or Joseph of Arimathea, was Yahusha's caretaker after the death of his father Joseph. But then even before getting into the present Grail research, I had already shown you his role as Miriam's caretaker in another place. And this would be a paper right here you could link to where Joseph of Arimathea comes into this. Joseph and Miriam split from Yehuda soon after Pilate's death, taking siblings Eliezer and Martha with them. They cast off in a ship without sails and landed in southern France. The rest, as I so often say, is his story. Yah willing, I'm actually going to be visiting the cave of Mary Magdalene this next year. That is on my bucket list, and I hope to do it. So anyways, it was once Pilate was removed from power, and apparently he, quote, can you see my bunny ears? He was suicided in Switzerland. And that's what the Acts chapter 29 states. That would be the lost chapter of Acts, that he was suicided there in Switzerland. And once that happened, the control he held was lost. And that's when it all started going bad for Christianity, and they started getting persecuted and stuff. Pontius Pilate wasn't there to protect them anymore. And Joseph took Miriam and Martha and Lazarus and a couple other people, and they set sail, or I should say in a ship without sails, ended up in France. There's more to the story, much more. We are only just now getting started. It ultimately involves Merlin, Arthur, and the Knights of the Round Table, as well as a quest for the Grail, and a mysterious figure known as the Fisher King. Mashiach fashioned the Round Table, by the way, according to this tale. I'm just telling you what this says, okay? I'm not saying he actually fashioned the Round Table, but you never really know. Before arriving at those romances, the narrative surrounding Joseph of Ramah's handing off of the Grail to a successor is long and, dare I say, drab in part. So I'm not going to go through the whole thing. It goes on for pages and pages, and I will give you the short of it. So Joseph confers with the Grail regarding what to do. An angel reminds him that he has a sister, and I think you pronounce it, how do you pronounce her name? Inigius. And she had married a man named Braun, and together they have 12 sons, which is really interesting. Many have pointed out the similarities between Braun and Bran the Blessed in the Welsh prose stories, though I have yet to read of anyone who has yet to make the Braun and Robert D. Boron connection. Ha ha ha. It's literally in his name. Anyways, the son of Inigius and Braun, who declares he has no desire to marry, will be declared the leader of the 12, indicating that the Grail will ultimately be passed down through him. Now, keep in mind, this is Joseph of Arimathea's relations. He has a sister. His sister is married. His sister has 12 sons. These would be, cousins to Messiah, right? And not knowing of the contest, the 12th son, Alan Lee Gross, declares to his father Braun that he would rather be flayed alive than take a wife. When Joseph heard of this, he sought an audience with Alan and commanded him to keep the laws of God. When all is said, I'm not sure where Robert de Boron is pulling his genealogy from. Not sure if anyone is. LOL. It seems all invented. I don't really know. As I had mentioned earlier, making Joseph a Roman soldier under Pilate rather than Yahusha's patriarch was clever camouflage by which the truth might be hidden in plain sight. If Joseph of Arimathea was Yahusha's great uncle, then I can see a scenario which would involve Energius as a great aunt. The Grail keepers, this is what's important, what you need to know. The Grail keepers were all family. They could only be family. You had to be in the blood of Joseph of Arimathea to be a Grail keeper. And this is why they cleverly, in these tales, they mask him to not be a relative of Yahushua HaMashiach, or else all would be given away. You see what I'm saying? In the likely situation that he was his grandfather, though, we know he had at least two daughters named Miriam Shalome, and Miriam the mother. And quick explanation, Miriam was dedicated to the temple as a young girl, which is why Joseph named his next daughter Miriam. So he actually, he gave his first daughter away, the Virgin Mary, and then he had a second daughter named her Mary. I cover those basics in Miriam of Migdol and the Mandala. There's also Miriam of Cleophas to consider, another possible sister, making the Miriams a trio. Some people think that there were three Miriam sisters. Miriam of Cleophas was the mother of Yaakov and Yosef, whereas Miriam Shalome was the mother of the sons of Zebedee, Yaakov and Yochanan. I'm just wondering, so just to show here, Messiah's entire entourage, they were all related to him pretty much, almost every single one of them. And I'm just wondering if the Grail is being passed down to any one of them. It's not like tradition doesn't have Yochanan, the virgin, being the same writer of the Gospel of John, and Miriam Shalome's son, taking Miriam, the mother of Yahusha, in as his own. Hopefully this is not too wordy for you, because there's a lot of interrelations going on here. And there's much to entangle, though again, the knot is purposely tied. The short of it is that Braun, Joseph's brother-in-law, the very character who happens to share a name with the mysterious rider, is revealed as the rich Fisher King. You've probably all heard of the Fisher King, and he's the guardian of the Grail. And this is what we read. As soon as the Fisher King has the vessel and grace bestowed upon him, he must journey westward wherever his heart leads him. And when he comes to rest, then he must await the coming of his son's son. And when the time is right to do so, pass on to him the vessel and the grace that he will have received from you. So the westward destination is revealed to be France, not overlooking the obvious Britain, Wales, and the whereabouts. It is there that Braun, the rich Fisher King, must await the coming of his son's son, the Grail's successor. Remember Alan Lee Gross and his refusal to take a woman? Alan Lee Gross has a son. And wouldn't you like to know his name? His name is Percival. You guys all know Percival. So skipping forward 100 or so pages, and that's a very long tale, and something like 500 years, Percival arrives in Arthur's court precisely when the Grail quest is officiated, thereby embodying the archetypal fool who, in the alchemical symbolism of the tarot, begins a new cycle. The end of Camelot is at hand. Of course, it ends in 537. So begins the great undertaking spanning a multitude of cyclical seasons, perhaps even decades. This Grail quest goes on and on and on. If you've ever seen any of the Grail movies, like they start out young men and they have like long gray beards at the end. And they're all like dying and stuff. They all have their stories, though de Boron is only concerned with Percival's part in the story making. So after wandering for many moons, seeking adventure, Percival stumbles upon the castle of Alan Lee Gross, his father. Alan is dead. His mother is dead. Only his sister survives. His sister takes Percival to meet one of Braun's 12 surviving sons, who is now living as a hermit. And then this is what he says. "Dear nephew," said the hermit, "know this. Once, when we were seated together at supper, we heard the voice of the Holy Spirit commanding us to go to far-off lands in the west. And it commanded my father Braun to come to these parts toward the setting sun, and said that to Alan Lee Gross would be born an heir who would have the Grail in his keeping, and that the Fisher King could not die until you had been to his court. And when you had done so, he would be healed and would bestow his grace and the vessel upon you, and you would be the Lord of the blood of our Lord Jesus Christ. And that comes from Percival, which is the third book in the trilogy. After you are you telling me that the blood of Mashiach is still sloshing around in a cup half a millennium after his crucifixion, and that's what so desperately needs to be guarded? Good to know none of Simon the leper's servants threw the cup into the rinse cycle before Yosef could get his hands on it, I guess. If there's any actual blood needing preserved, it's what can be found on the mercy seat, thanks in part to Yahusha, our high priest. But you don't hear any of the Grail storytellers talking about that, nor is there any indication that the Ark of the Covenant is being hinted at. One of the criticisms I will surely receive from the Arthurian fanboys is that there are many different versions of the Fisher King, and not all agree. And that may be so. But there are common elements that run through each and every one of them. And of course, I have chosen one of the earliest stories, officially speaking. No need for misdirection. The most prominent has just been highlighted. In every noted story, the Fisher King is wounded in the groin. Alternatively, he is wounded in the side or the thigh by some descriptions, which is a gentleman scholar's way of symbolically saying the same thing. Okay, this guy can't reproduce. The very heir, you have to be a relative, and the very heir to the Grail has an injury in his private area where now he cannot reproduce. Well, that's both odd and fascinating at the same time, knowing that the Grail began with Mary Magdalene and presumably continued through a child, hence the blood, or is it safe to say bloodline by this point in our relationship? The Grail's protector is impotent, another clue. Not your typical obelisk, is it? The fact that the rich Fisher King would no longer be functioning when his grandson appears to claim custodianship of Christ's blood may imply that the death of Alan Lee Gross was the cause of his wound, because the Grail keepers could only ever be a descendant of Joseph of Arimathea, you see. It also entails the beginning of a new cycle, a reset, if you will. I'll go ahead and say it, as some of you may already be thinking what I'm thinking. Percival's receiving of the Grail isn't simply a changing of the guard. It happens to coincide with the death of Camelot and the beginning of the Millennial Kingdom, according to my 7,000-year timeline deception thesis. And again, my thesis is that the Millennial Kingdom was a physical manifestation from the 500s to about the whereabouts of 1500. Put in slightly different terms, can it be said that the arrival of Percival represented for the Arthurian writers, writing centuries later and in the most coded and esoteric terms, the announcement of an heir from the king and his queen? Some of you will kick and scream, going full toddler on me at the mere suggestion, but that is the Grail legend for you in a nutshell, with my own added Millennial Kingdom investigation tacked onto it, obviously. So Yahusha came to earth to rule as a king. He took a woman. Their union was fruitful, and the line exists, the Holy Grail. There's a reason why I kept mum on the subject. It's not for everyone. And if that's you, then I'm okay with your not being okay with it if you're okay with me being okay with it. Look, I'm not trying to convince anyone that our controllers covered up a holy bloodline in our current short season of deception. Really, I'm not. And actually, I don't think the bloodline exists, just so you know. Even if I happen to suspect it's true, all of it, though I do have my doubts, what I am attempting to do here is show you that the Arthurian romances make the most contextual sense when we comprehend an actual bloodline in the Grail and the guardians of the Grail rather than DNA from the scene of a crime. There's so much going on in the Grail romances that I cannot possibly cover every detail, nor will I even attempt it. And in failing to do so, am undoubtedly committing a disservice. For example, the Fisher King was given the title because he quite literally fished. Well, bodies of water have been potent symbols of death and the unconscious since time immemorial. Fishing is the appropriate symbol of dipping down into one's own unconscious, with the fish representing the unconscious of the higher self. And think about how Narcissist could never get past his own reflection, right? It was surface level, and he was supposed to go deeper, and he didn't. And of course, when he fell in, went deeper, he actually died. Since water brings life, the creatures living beneath its glassy surface can be said to symbolize fertility, birth, and rebirth, thereby contrasting the Fisher King's wound even further. Remember, the Fisher King has the wound in his groin, can't reproduce. He's hoping for this heir to show up, perhaps because his son is dead, and he has to wait for his grandson Percival to show up. Perhaps the Arthurian writers were attempting to tell us of a time forgotten which can now only be discovered in our dreams. Did I also mention that the Fisher King's castle, Corbinick, is invisible? That right there is a discussion needing its own paper. Especially if it's this realm in Britain that Percival had to ride around for years and years. I mean, it shouldn't take you more than, I don't know what, a week to ride around Britain. It took him years and years and years. So he finally found this invisible castle. It was right there in front of him the whole time. Kind of a fascinating thought. The mystery behind the fish might be easily explained in my Vesica Piscis paper. In that one, I showed you the miraculous catch of 153 fish in the Gospel of John and its identification not only with the ichthys fish and millennial kingdom architecture, but the feminine divine in the age of Pisces. Perhaps more importantly, though, I spoke of it under my breath. The Magdalene is written in Greek right there, bearing the numbers 8 plus 40 plus 1 plus 3 plus 4 plus 1 plus 30 plus 8 plus 50 plus 8, all of which equals 153. Many claim Braun became the Fisher King because he fished while awaiting the healing of his wound, but that doesn't appear to be the case at all. No, Braun became the Fisher King when Miriam of Migdol and the child was handed to him. But then did you know that the lance of Longinus takes equal billing with the Grail? When Percival finally arrives to the castle of the Fisher King, he sees a procession involving both items, the Grail and then the lance. They're equally important to the narrative. And so this is what we read right here. At last, he came to his senses and said, "Sire, you should know that Alan Le Gros, your son, sire, was my father." When the Fisher King heard this, his elation redoubled, and he said, "Dear grandson, I'm very glad you've come." And with that, he knelt down and gave thanks to our Lord. Then he took Percival by the hand and led him before the vessel and said, "Dear grandson, this is the lance with which Longinus struck Christ on the cross. And this vessel, called the Grail, holds the blood of that Joseph gathered as it flowed from his wounds to the earth." So now he's regathering his grandson, right? And he's kind of taking him through this ceremony, this explanation of their family history. I have a closing statement which I aim to make immediately thereafter, though before I do, there is one more quote which needs to be written down. So after the Fisher King's pronouncement to Percival that the lance of Longinus and the Grail were the items before him, the voice of the Holy Spirit enters the room, and then look at what immediately follows. It says, "And Braun did as it had instructed and taught Percival the sacred words that Joseph had taught him, which I cannot and must not tell you." So there's something to do with this feminine and masculine, the lance and the cup and the blood coming together that relates to his grandson, who they're of course all related to Joseph and Arimathea, that the writer cannot tell you. Why not? Right? I thought it was just a cup and a lance, right? What's the big deal? It appears as though Robert D. Boron doesn't want his reader to forget that the lance and the Grail cannot be taken exclusively at face value. The lance is a phallic symbol, whereas the Grail is feminine. They work hand in hand, or should I say boy part meets girl part, plug and socket, electricity. Oh, fine. How about I just spill out the birds and the bees for you? Know that I am not trying to be vulgar at all when telling you the lance penetrated the Grail and filled it with the very blood, which then required protection. In completely exoteric and material terms, where was Mary Magdalene again when Longinus thrust his lance into Mashiach's thigh? Time and again, she is suspiciously shown directly beneath him, not a coincidence. Make no mistake, Yahushua was truly crucified. Okay, I can't speak for all the other researchers out there. I do not identify with them. I believe he was crucified. He resurrected from the dead on the third day. His body did not see decay. He went down to Sheol, he resurrected the spirits up into paradise, and that an actual lance pierced his side. Nobody is denying that fact. Certainly not me. I am ultimately speaking of an earlier hour, my suggestion being that the night immediately following Miriam's breaking open of the alabaster jar, when stating she received the blood of Mashiach, the second Adam, thereby becoming the Grail. But I digress. Percival, so I do think people ask me this question a lot. I do think that the alabaster jar moment that night, that it appears that they officiated their marriage. All right. I could also take you through artwork too, where it does appear to show Mary Magdalene was pregnant at the cross. So again, you can argue this and say, I don't like that. But there are artists out there who were depicting this hundreds of years ago. And apparently to become an artist in the Enlightenment, you all had to be in the know, apparently. Like they all went to some school, and when they got their diplomas, they're like, oh, by the way, when you paint a picture of the crucifixion, make sure Mary Magdalene is pregnant. Apparently only they knew about it and nobody else did. The point being is that, our past has been scrubbed. And it wasn't just the artists who knew. Percival received the Grail into his care, living thereafter in an invisible castle, totally inaccessible by mortals, which is totally badass. The quest was over. A worthy successor was discovered. Camelot lost its power. Arthur killed Mordred at the Battle of Camelon, and then he himself was carted off to Avalon, with Excalibur finding its home among the fishes. The Dark Age was initiated. Plumbing came to an end. Nobody bathed. And everyone lived among mounds of poo. You know the drill. Nothing else to possibly see, I'm sure. The end. Well, Sir Galahad also had a part to play in this, being a Grail finder and all. After pushing the publish button on the first leg of my report, I was mostly just waiting around for the Pitchfork and Torch Committee. You can see that this is an update right here. They have wisened up to their ways, it seems. I don't have the Pitchfork Committee coming around like they used to. Having never shown face. But then there are also the AI bots posing as Arthurian experts, and I'm sure they'll show up under this video. They usually do. And they too, it's like weird. You do this study on something that all of a sudden you have these people you've never heard from before, and they just show up, and it's like, who? What? That's whatever. They're just an expert on what you're talking about. Anyways, they too never showed up, the AI bots, though I was half expecting them to. And what is going on? Is the media taking everyone out on a walk or something? It must be an election year. I guess I'll just be speaking to myself then, and whoever's listening to this, and that one reader who cares about the mysteries as I do. Yes, I'm speaking to you. Welcome. Thank you for being here tonight. The reason for my not including Galahad in the earlier leg of the report, because I just talked about Percival, is that I was only concerned with Robert de Boron's Arthurian trilogy, bookended by Joseph de Arimathea and Percival. Not even Christian de Troyes, whom Robert de Boron based his work upon, thought to mention Galahad. Well, Galahad hadn't been invented yet. That is, if we're going by the textbook timeline, you know the drill by now. Officially, Galahad first appears in the 13th century Old French Arthurian epic known as Lancelot Grail Cycle, though it is also more popularly known as the Vulgate Cycle. And here is the best part. Authorship is unknown. Isn't that a gas? How is it that all these amazing books, we don't know who the authors are? They just, they took years of their life to write this poetic masterpiece, confessing all this stuff. And I got a bug in here. And they just don't even want to stamp their name to it. And of course, Sir Thomas Malory's Les Mortes d'Arthur featured Galahad prominently. So let's get right into his genealogy, Galahad, fictional or not, because that's what any of this really comes down to, doesn't it? Galahad was a Grail keeper, though it isn't his father who's biologically traced to Joseph of Arimathea this time around. It is his mother. Technically, Lancelot is said to be a direct descendant from Nasine. Nasine, along with Mordrains, were two of Joseph's earliest converts in Judea. Together, they traveled to Britain in hopes of keeping the Grail safe. So Lancelot is not related. He is not related to the Holy Bloodline, but he does come from descendants who were the earliest disciples of Mashiach, or really of Joseph of Arimathea in Judea, and they traveled with them on that boat out to keep Mary Magdalene safe. or the bloodline. So I guess you could say Lancelot was a spiritual descendant. Galahad, and this is why Lancelot can never be a Grail keeper. He wasn't actually biological. Galahad's mother, though, she went by many names: Elaine, Elizabeth, and I guess Amite or Mighty. I don't know how to pronounce that, being three of them. More often than not, she was simply identified as the Grail Maiden in a lot of these Lancelot, Arthur tales. And will it surprise you to learn that she was the daughter of the Fisher King? So Lancelot got with the Fisher King's daughter, and they had Galahad together when he wasn't, of course, off having an affair with Arthur's wife. If you're keeping track, that would make Percival and Galahad cousins. The Arthurian romances are never short of scandal, and Galahad's conception doesn't disappoint. You may recall how Uther Pendragon employed Merlin's services, disguising himself as Gorlois so as to rape Gorlois's wife, Tintagel, thereby conceiving Arthur. It was the opposite this time around. Elaine actually rapes Lancelot repeatedly, not just like over and over again. She raped him so voraciously that Lancelot was quite literally driven into madness. So, yeah, imagine that. If you're curious how the birds and the bees works in reverse, Elaine disguised herself as Queen Guinevere, and of course, Lancelot was only interested in being true to Arthur's wife and nobody else, whom he was secretly committing adultery with. How very nice and noble of him. So she knew this, and she's like, well, if I disguise myself as Queen Guinevere, and then, of course, they have intercourse over and over again. Once he finds out about it, he's so distraught that he actually had intercourse with a non-married woman that was disguised as a married woman, that he actually went mad. The slightly longer explanation is that Morgan Le Fay was so jealous of Elaine's beauty that she magically trapped her in a boiling bath. Her rescue came by way of Lancelot, whom Elaine immediately fell in love with. And the part where Lancelot refused to sleep with any woman but Guinevere you already know about. Elaine then went to the sorceress Dame Bruzin for help. And rather than whipping up a magical concoction, the sorceress offered Lancelot wine. Who'd have guessed that would have worked? She also gave Elaine a magical ring resembling one of Guinevere's in order to trick Lancelot, and that, boys and girls, is how babies are born. Actually, her daddy, the Fisher King, comes into some versions of the story as well. His willing participation really should be highlighted because obviously copulation plays into the Grail narrative. Lancelot was selected for seed, but he was too love-struck and blind in his duties to use his peripheral vision and participate. Even though, so Lancelot is supposed to be a protector of the Grail. He's chosen to be included within the seed of the Grail, but he's totally blinded by his adulterous love for Guinevere. And it's why King Pelles, by some variations, enlisted the help of Dame Bruzin, hoping to fulfill the prophecy of the Grail Knight who would surpass Lancelot. So Lancelot's the greatest knight in the kingdom. They need someone to surpass him. And the person they want to surpass him, they want to be in the Grail family. And of course, that's Galahad. So upon learning that he'd been duped on the morning after a full night of this, Lancelot drew his sword so as to slay his enchantress where she lay, because how dare you be unmarried and have intercourse with me? But then, having learned that they conceived a son together, Elaine was immediately forgiven. The hope, apparently, was that Lancelot would agree to marriage after a child was secured. He did no such thing, choosing to ride off towards Camelot, ashamed of what he'd done. Eventually, Elaine found Lancelot in her garden, insane to the membrane, and she brought him to the Grail, which was shown to him through a veil, thereby curing him. The two then decided to go off to the Isle of Joy, where they lived together for several years as husband and wife. But what of Galahad? So Lancelot does end up marrying this woman eventually. So Galahad was born and placed in the care of a paternal great aunt, an abbess at a nunnery. And anyways, there is the Galahad conception story that you've always wondered about. Have you checked out Galahad's coat of arms as of late? It contains a white shield with a vermilion cross, and that's Templar, baby. It also happens to be a Tav. I've talked about that a lot. The vermilion cross, however, was given to the Knights Templar by Pope Eugene III, as textbook history goes. What do you suppose the Grail Riders are attempting to tell us? Well, for starters, many suspect the Grail Riders derive from the Cistercians, a mystical medieval order and branch of the Benedictine monks, though their origins apparently derived from the influence of Bernard of Clairvaux, Bernard of Clairvaux. I checked. Bernard was a co-founder of the Templars. So I have covered the Templars in a couple of papers in the past. I'm sorry if this is wordy for everyone's side. There's just, it's kind of hard going through. There's so many details to these Arthurian tales, so many different players and events. So speaking of the Templars, I have covered them in the past, namely the Friday the 13th hoax and the Shrouded Turin, though it is odd that I have yet to detail their rise to fame. Maybe I'll have to do that. I'm thinking one concise read needs to be put together, but not today. Well, once again, the short of it is that Baldwin I, the first Christian king of Jerusalem, died in 1118. This is official history. It is then said that his cousin and successor, Baldwin II, was approached by 9 French knights who volunteered their services as mercenaries for the protection of pilgrims in the Holy Land. They were immediately given lodging on the Temple Mount, which, as I've already shown in the Temple Mount hoax, was really for Antonia rather than the Mount Zion, not the city of David. Why the Templars would protect the Dome of the Rock, a Muslim holy site, is never explained to us, but whatever. Read that paper. And of course, I'm of the opinion now that did not start out. Well, I was of the opinion then, but that it was not Muslim. It became Muslim. The Dome of the Rock matches no Islamic architecture that we have anywhere in the world. I'm of a very different opinion now. And, why did the Christians never destroy it? So on and so forth when they had control of Jerusalem. All right. Anyways, we are told the dome is the oldest surviving mosque, and yet the Mohammedans never modeled anything else upon it. And why is that? It wasn't built by the architects of Islam. Anyways, the 9 knights were paid to maintain the Temple Mount for 9 years until 1128, when they were quite suddenly elevated to the status of a holy order by Pope Honorius II, declaring them to be an army of God. The thought, of course, is that they discovered something of great importance underneath Solomon's temple, for Antonia. Was it the secret lost teachings of Jesus Christ? Oh dear. That's what a lot of people say now. It's like, come on, really? Like, oh yeah, they have the secret lost teachings of Jesus Christ under the Temple Mount. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. 9 middle-aged Jews were apparently able to blackmail the Catholic Church with their knowledge. Blah. And so I'm like, can you imagine that today, actually having some document that you actually are able to blackmail the Catholic Church? Like, no, like that's not the way it actually, like, no, I'm sorry. No, that's the way people frame this though. And I just don't see it. I don't buy it that these 9 knights were able to blackmail. They had a truth so despairing to the Christian Church that they were able to blackmail them. Like I said, I'm of the opinion that in the Middle Ages, everybody knew the Messiah had a betrothed. That changed later. And so I'm of the opinion that their entire origin story, as well as their demise, come to us by the way of war propaganda. Freemasonry can declare its lineage from the Templars all they want. I don't care. They can make up their own stories. I really don't care. When in fact, they are the inheritors, and everything they hold in their bosom is controlled opposition. So I'm not really interested in who the Freemasons claim they come from. Now, you totally know it would be a crime to snub Indiana Jones in The Last Crusade in a report such as this one. I'm close to the end, guys. Thank you, everyone, for your patience, for those who've held on there. Most of you have. Looks like Lucas and Spielberg decided to circumnavigate the Templars' part in the Grail legend entirely, or so it seems, by involving knights of the First Crusade rather than a second or a third. And the First Crusade lasted from 1096 through 1099, some 2 decades before the knights would arrive in Jerusalem. Bummer. The typical preterist position is that the Millennial Kingdom was a spiritual one, which lasted from 70 or 72 AD until 1072. Though those are the people who say that it was a literal 1,000 years. I've met many preterists who say that even the 1,000 number is metaphorical. It's ongoing, or maybe it lasted 40 years or 40 days or whatever. Anyways, preterists will say there was a spiritual kingdom whereby Satan was released afterwards, and the Crusades were a sure thing. So, and I get it on the official timeline, right? If Satan was bound around 70 to 72 AD, he's released around 1072 AD. What does he do? He goes and starts war. He starts the Crusades. I get it. It's not the chronology I'm going with, but for all those of you who refuse my 7,000-year timeline deception thesis in favor of the preterist position, don't claim I've never given you a helping hand. You're welcome. Now, even Presser John has a part to play in the Grail legend. I did a report on him 2 or 3 months ago. And why doesn't anybody tell me these things? If you don't have the faintest clue who Presser John is, then I don't know what to tell you. You're going to have to read the Legend of Presser John for yourself. It's a long report, just like this one, like 2.5 hours to read through it. There's a lot there, a lot of layers. It's a very interesting story. And why I decided to mention him here is because he makes an appearance in Indiana Jones' Last Crusade. And why doesn't anybody tell me these things? And probably because he enters and exits the scene so quickly that hardly anyone had the opportunity to notice, even in the 40 years since its release. Can you believe it? It's been almost that long. He can be seen when Dr. Henry Jones Sr. Thumbs through his Grail diary in the German Zeppelin, thereby giving us fascinating figure in the Grail legend. In case there is any doubt, Dr. Jones is reading from an actual Grail diary, a prop which has been reproduced for nostalgia connoisseurs, and it contains the following words. So they actually did, interesting enough, they never bring him up in the movie. They do show Presser John in the Grail diary, though. And it says, what better place than this spiritual no man's land between this world and the next? That's fascinating. At a slight remove from reality, but still historically attested to, for the earthly home of the Grail, sometimes called Lapis Ixilis, which has been interpreted as the wish for paradise. It is precisely here that Wolfram places it, by inference, if not in actuality, by making the eventual guardian of the Grail, Presser John, said to be 562 years old. The true and proper home of the Grail is paradise, the perfect realm of the spirit where the priest King John, its last guardian, reigns benignly from his castle within the garden of earthly delights. Comes from the Grail diary. Now, Presser John ended his days as a guardian of the Holy Grail, and in paradise of all places. I know I'm quoting from a movie prop, but you've stuck it out this long. Hang with me a little longer. The source derives from Wolfram, and Wolfram would be a reference to the 13th century poet and knight Wolfram von Eschenbach, author of the chivalric romantic poem Percival. And I checked. The set decorators were precisely correct. Wolfram did include Presser John as one of the few Grail caretakers. And do you know what that means? He too was a direct descendant of Joseph of Arimathea. Not only that, but if Presser John's part in the narrative is a correct one, then the Grail, or rather the Holy Family of Messiah, ended up precisely where I suspected them to end up: the hidden wilderness, the blessed realm, the undying lands. Which is why I said earlier that, and I'm going to show you here for the conclusion in the last 10 minutes or so, that the holy blood, or the blood of the Grail, the descendants, the Holy Family, the guardians of the Grail, they all went to paradise. They all left. I think maybe at the end of the Millennial Kingdom, they're gone. I don't think they're on the earth anymore, at least not in any official capacity. So the reason I brought it up, The Last Crusade, is because the story involves 3 fictional brothers. And if you recall, there can only be three Grail keepers at any given time. The 3 laid siege to it's getting late, guys, Alexandrata for an entire year. And in the spoiled city, they discovered clues which led them to the location of the Grail, which then remained under the protection of one brother for nearly 1,000 years. Wink, wink. Whereas the other 2 decided to ride on, dying as mortals. They are clearly based upon the 3 Grail keepers, Percival and Galahad, you already know about, and there was another which I have yet to mention. The last, so the 3 Grail keepers, other than the Fisher King, we have Percival, Galahad, and now we have Sir Bors. And I checked. His genealogy is a bit foggy, though I think it is safe to say he is related to one Grail keeper or another. As evidence, Bors was most notably a cousin of Lancelot. Also, all 3 of them, Percival, Galahad, and Bors, were virgins. And remember now, there were 3 knights in the Last Crusade. There are 3 Grail keepers in history, aside from the Fisher King. And it seems that virginity is always a prerequisite of being a Grail keeper, though in the case of the Fisher King, he had his own troubles down there. After many adventures, Galahad, along with his two companions, Percival and Bors, managed to find themselves in the mystical city of Corbinic, which you may recall belongs to the Fisher King. And I really do want to do a whole thing sometime on just the invisible cities, castles, things like that, that they talk about at the end of the Millennial Kingdom. In later versions, his son Eleazar is still present, which may be another clue, seeing as how Miriam of Magdalene had a brother who was raised from the dead, and his name was Eleazar. The Grail Knights are then tasked with taking the Grail to Sarras, yet another mystical city which cannot be found on any map today. And there's a lot of, these books talking about the city of Sarras. In earlier renditions, Sarras was an island near to Egypt, which Joseph of Arimathea and presumably Mary Magdalene stopped at en route to France and Britain. That's interesting. The Vulgate Grail cycle places Sarras on the road from Jerusalem to the Euphrates in Babylon, which is especially interesting since Muslims were said to be called the Saracens during the Crusades, like the city Sarras. You see what I'm saying? And there's something going on here that's not adding up. After arriving in Sarras and then remaining there for an entire year cycle, Galahad is visited by Joseph of Arimathea, who has arrived to close shop on the Grail story. Depending upon the telling, Galahad is either physically taken to paradise or his mortal body is left behind and buried in a grave with Percival's sister, who soon thereafter joins them. And then we read the following. As soon as he had said this, Galahad knelt before the table, and moments later he fell face down upon the flagstone floor. His soul had already left his body. It was borne away by angels, rejoicing and praising our Lord. And no sooner had Galahad passed away than a great wonder occurred. The two companions clearly saw a hand descending from heaven, though they did not see the body it belonged to, and it clasped both the holy vessel and the lance and carried them away to heaven, and no man since, however bold, has ever dared claim that he has seen the Holy Grail. So now you know what I was going at there, that the bloodline's gone. It was taken. And I think this is a metaphor for the millennial kingdom. I think that they were there, they were helping rule, they were, some of the kings and priests that was ruling along Yahushua HaMashiach, they were taken away, the last of them. I realize now that no direct quotes have been given in my latest update, but none but this one. How very unlike my usual dictation style. I was kind of all over the place, though I think I kept my balance in the walk and turn in my walk and turn test. No need for a DUI when I was writing this. There is no shortage of information out there, and I figured you can source the information for yourself. All right. So everything you can fact check me on everything I was talking about tonight. And so, finally, we have before us a quote from The Quest of the Holy Grail, 13th century French text. Once again, author unknown, incredible. It's a familiar trend. Who are these people that wrote this stuff? I sourced it for one simple and straightforward reason. It describes the last known whereabouts of the Grail. Actually, it's, as I've already stated, the Grail and the lance are equally important, being the male and the female components. People talk about the Grail, they always forget about the lance. They both ended up in Sarras, a city which cannot be found on a map. But then they ascended to heaven with Galahad, a direct descendant, I believe, of Mary Magdalene. Yes, I just said it, and I'm not taking it back. Come to your own conclusion. We're all adults here. That all the fuss was over a wooden cup rather than the living blood of Mashiach, that's fine by me. If you think all the fuss was over a cup that he drank from. I mean, how many cups did he drink from in his lifetime? I'm not here to convince you of an actual messianic lineage. The case, however, can be made that it's what the Grail writers were getting at. Okay, so before any attacks, oh, look what Noel's saying. No, Noel's just pointing out what they advocated. All right, and I'm leaving it up to you as an adult to take the information, come to your own conclusion. Such are my present efforts. Seeing as how the Dark Ages were invented, I'm of the opinion that the Arthurian romances arrived 2 or 3 centuries maybe later than is claimed. But that is just my opinion, and you are free to yours. So they say that they arrived in the 11th, 12th, 13th century. I'm saying maybe they arrived a couple centuries later. And what, pray tell, was the ultimate aim of their narrative? I think you know. I've been practically screaming into your ear this entire time. The kingdom of Mashiach, along with the lance in the vessel and the blood being passed between them, are all three bound together. And though the kingdom of Mashiach manifested upon the earth for a millennium, according to my investigation and my thesis, my conclusion, it has since come and gone, materially speaking, though the kingdom is still within us, and it still exists in the blessed land to this day, the hidden wilderness, and it has returned to the place of its origin. Perhaps that is why it is said that the Grail, like the kingdom it represents, can only be found within. Good night, everybody.